The morning had started with promise, the kind that fools desperate men into believing the world might actually offer them mercy. Elias Crowe stood before a cracked mirror in the back room of the general store, wrestling with a collar that seemed determined to strangle him. His hands, calloused from years of fighting stubborn land that refused to yield crops, fumbled with the unfamiliar fabric. He'd borrowed the suit from Samuel Chen, the shopkeeper, who'd worn it to his own wedding 15 years prior. It smelled like camphor and old dreams. "You look like a scarecrow trying to pass for civilized," Samuel said from the doorway, arms crossed, but eyes warm. He was one of the few in Red Creek who'd spoken to Elias without contempt these past months. "Feel like one too." Elias finally managed the collar, though it sat crooked. "This whole thing feels like I'm play-acting at being someone I'm not." "Marriage does that to a man." Samuel stepped forward, adjusting the collar with practiced efficiency. "Makes you into someone new. Question is whether you're ready for that particular transformation." Through the thin walls, Elias could hear the town beginning to stir. Red Creek was a settlement that existed because men had run out of places to run, a collection of wooden structures squatting in dust, held together by desperation and stubborn refusal to admit defeat. It sat 3 miles north of the disputed border, in territory that both nations claimed but neither truly controlled. The kind of place where law arrived late and left early, where justice was something you measured in gunpowder and graves. "They're still talking, you know," Samuel said quietly. "About her. About you. About what it means." Elias knew. The whole town had opinions about Elias Crowe marrying Isabella Ruiz. She was Catholic, spoke Spanish as her first language, came from a family that had worked this land before it belonged to either nation that now fought over it. He was Protestant, English-speaking, arrived 3 years ago with a land grant and foolish notions about building something permanent in a place that chewed up permanence and spit out bones. Their union was political whether they wanted it to be or not. "Let them talk," Elias said, though his jaw tightened. "I'm not marrying the town. I'm marrying her." "The town won't see it that way. Neither will the men who profit from keeping people divided." Samuel's expression darkened. "You heard about the bank shipment arriving yesterday?" Elias had. $3,000 in territorial currency, meant to fund the new railroad expansion. It sat in Abraham Marsh's bank, probably the largest sum of money Red Creek had ever housed, the kind of sum that attracted attention from men who took what they wanted. "Marsh hired extra guards," Elias said. "Nobody's fool enough to rob a bank in broad daylight in a town this size. Everyone knows everyone. There's nowhere to run." Samuel made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been doubt. "You'd be surprised what men are fool enough to do when they want something bad enough. Speaking of which," he pulled out a pocket watch. "You've got 20 minutes before that church fills up with everyone who wants to watch you either make history or make a spectacle of yourself." Elias took a steadying breath. His stomach felt like he'd swallowed a nest of snakes. "Is she—" "She's beautiful," Samuel said with certainty. "And she's certain. That's more than most men get. Don't waste it by looking backwards." The church stood at Red Creek's eastern edge, a simple wooden structure with a cross that leaned slightly to the left, as if uncertain about its own convictions. Father Miguel, who served the Catholic families, and Reverend Potter, who ministered to the Protestants, had agreed to perform a joint ceremony, a compromise that pleased no one but satisfied the requirements of both traditions. When Elias arrived, the church was already half full. He recognized faces. Martha Gaines, the boarding house owner who'd given him his first meal in Red Creek. Thomas Clay, who owned the livery and had sold Elias his first horse. Deputy Wade Holloway, young and nervous, probably assigned to keep watch in case the ceremony provoked trouble. What Elias noticed more than the friendly faces were the gaps. Prominent families missing, people who'd rather make a statement through absence than presence. The Marsh family, the Cranstons, the Duvals, all the names that mattered in Red Creek's informal hierarchy, all conspicuously not present. "Cowards," a voice muttered beside him. Elias turned to find Jack Brennan, who owned the saloon and the closest thing Elias had to a friend in Red Creek. Jack was 10 years older, weathered by a life that had taught him to expect the worst and be grateful when mediocre showed up instead. "They're protecting their interests," Elias said. "That's what I said. Cowards." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "You ready for this?" "No." "Good. Man who's ready for marriage is a man who doesn't understand what he's getting into. Jack grinned. She's worth it, though. That woman's got steel in her spine. You'll need that, living out on that patch of dirt you call a farm. The organ began, a wheezing instrument that had traveled across half a continent in a wagon and never quite recovered from the journey. But it played, and people stood, and Elias's heart decided to attempt escape through his throat. Then Isabella appeared at the back of the church, and the world narrowed to just her. She wore a dress that had belonged to her mother, off-white lace that had survived decades and still maintained its dignity. Her dark hair was pulled back, flowers woven through it, desert blooms that thrived in hostile soil. Her father, Vicente Ruiz, walked beside her, his face weathered and unreadable, a man escorting his daughter into a union he neither fully approved nor fully opposed. When Isabella's eyes met Elias's, something settled in his chest. This was right. Whatever the town thought, whatever complications followed, this was the one true thing in a world of calculated compromises. They met at the altar. Vicente placed Isabella's hand in Elias's, and the older man's grip was firm when he leaned close. "You hurt her. I will make you regret being born," Vicente whispered in English carefully chosen for clarity. "Yes, sir," Elias managed. Vicente stepped back. Father Miguel and Reverend Potter stood together, an unlikely pair united by the occasion. Father Miguel cleared his throat to begin when the first gunshot cracked across Red Creek like the world splitting open. The sound came from the direction of the bank, unmistakable and catastrophic. For a frozen heartbeat, no one moved. The human mind resists sudden chaos, tries to rationalize it into something manageable. Then 3 more shots followed, rapid fire, and someone outside screamed. Deputy Holloway moved first, hand dropping to his revolver as he turned toward the door. He made it 2 steps before the church doors burst open and chaos poured inside. There were 6 of them, maybe 7. Hard to count when they moved like a storm given human form. They wore dusters dark with trail dust, bandanas pulled up over their faces, hats pulled low. But what mattered were the guns, revolvers, rifles, shotguns, all pointed at a church full of unarmed people who'd come to witness a wedding. "Everyone down!" The leader's voice cut through the rising panic like a blade. "On the ground now, or we start reducing the population." People dropped, some to their knees, some flat to the floor. Elias instinctively moved to shield Isabella, but she was already lowering herself with deliberate control, her hand gripping his with surprising strength. Deputy Holloway hadn't dropped. His revolver was half drawn when the outlaw closest to him, a tall man with a rifle, swung the barrel in a vicious arc that connected with the deputy's temple. Holloway went down hard, blood already streaming from the gash. "I said everyone," the leader repeated. He was older than the others, 40s maybe, with a voice that suggested he'd given orders before and expected them obeyed. "We're not here for you church folk. We just need you to stay real still and quiet while we conclude our business in town." From outside came more gunfire, more screaming. Red Creek was a small town with minimal law enforcement. 1 sheriff, 1 deputy, a handful of men who'd volunteered for an informal watch. Against a coordinated gang hitting fast and hard, there wasn't much organized resistance to mount. Elias kept his eyes on the outlaws while his mind raced. 6 men in the church, probably more outside handling the actual robbery. They'd hit during the wedding when half the town was gathered in one place, easy to control. Smart, in a vicious way. The leader moved through the church, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He surveyed the crowd with the detached interest of a man assessing livestock. "Well now," he said, stopping near the altar where Elias and Isabella remained frozen. "Isn't this a pretty picture? Interrupted wedding, that's downright tragic." His tone suggested he found it more amusing than tragic. "Please," Father Miguel said, voice quavering but steady. "Take what you want from the bank. Leave these people." "Oh, we're taking what we want, Padre. Don't you worry about that." The leader crouched down, bringing himself level with Elias and Isabella. His eyes, the only part of his face visible above the bandana, were pale gray, like dirty ice. "What's your name, boy?" Elias met those eyes and saw nothing human in them. "Elias Crowe." "And the bride?" "Leave her alone," Elias said, hearing the shake in his voice and hating it. "Wasn't asking you for permission. Was asking for a name. The outlaw reached out, almost gently, and lifted Isabella's chin with one gloved finger. Pretty thing like you deserves to be identified. Isabella Ruiz, she said, her voice clearer than Elias's had been. No tremor. Pure defiance wrapped in forced courtesy. The leader studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, turned to one of his men. Marcus, come look at this. A younger outlaw, maybe 25, approached. He had the same pale eyes. Brothers, Elias realized, or maybe cousins. When this second man saw Isabella, something shifted in his posture. Well, Marcus said. Ain't you something? Elias felt Isabella's hand tighten on his. A sick understanding began crawling through his gut. Outside, an explosion shook the church. The bank safe being blown open, Elias guessed. These men had come prepared, not just a smash-and-grab robbery, but a planned military-style operation. The leader, he'd heard one of them call him Calhoun, checked a pocket watch. 3 minutes, boys, then we ride. 3 minutes. Elias's mind seized on that. 3 minutes, and they'd be gone, leaving Red Creek in ruins, but leaving people alive. 3 minutes to endure, and then, we're taking her, Calhoun said casually, nodding toward Isabella. The words didn't register immediately. When they did, Elias was already moving, surging upward despite every scrap of common sense screaming at him to stay down. He made it halfway to his feet before a rifle butt slammed into his chest, knocking him back and sending stars across his vision. No! Vicente Ruiz shouted, also rising, also immediately struck down. Easy now, Calhoun said, his tone almost paternal. Nobody else needs to bleed today. We're just expanding our take a bit. Consider it a tax on weddings in disputed territories. You can't, Elias gasped, struggling to breathe where the rifle butt had struck. I surely can, and I am. Calhoun nodded to Marcus and another man. Get her on a horse. Gentle now, she's valuable cargo. Isabella fought. She was smart about it, didn't waste energy screaming, didn't flail wildly. She went for eyes, for weak points, made them work for every inch. But she was one woman against men who'd spent lifetimes taking what they wanted through violence. They dragged her toward the door. Elias tried again to rise. This time, a boot caught him in the ribs. Calhoun's boot, deliberate and measured. Stay down, boy. You come after us, you die badly. Accept your loss and maybe you get to live long enough to marry someone else. I'll kill you, Elias heard himself say through the pain. I'll find you and I'll... Calhoun crouched again, and this time when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. No, you won't. You're a farmer playing at being a man. You got soft hands and soft spine. You'll cry for a few days, maybe get drunk, maybe fire off some tough talk in a saloon. But you won't come after us because you don't have it in you. Men like you bend. It's men like me who break things. He stood, gestured to his men. We're done here. Anyone follows before we're clear of town, we start executing hostages. He raised his voice. That means you stay put for 10 minutes. Count them slow. They left like a storm departing, sudden, catastrophic, leaving destruction in their wake. The church remained frozen for a 5 count after the door slammed shut. Then chaos erupted. People rising, shouting, Vicente Ruiz screaming his daughter's name, Father Miguel trying to restore order, Reverend Potter calling for calm. Elias stayed on the floor, ribs screaming, chest heaving, watching the door where Isabella had disappeared. Outside, horses thundered. More gunshots, celebratory now, the sound of men who'd won and knew it. Then the thunder faded, heading south toward the border, toward lawless territory, where jurisdiction died and pursuit became suicide. Jack Brennan helped Elias to his feet. Easy now. You took a couple good hits. They took her. The words felt stupid in his mouth, too simple for the reality they described. They just took her. I know, brother. Jack's face was grim. But you heard what he said. We go after them now. I don't care what he said. Elias shoved away from Jack, stumbled toward the door. His vision swam, but his legs carried him outside into sunlight that felt like an insult. How could the sun still shine? How could the sky still be that particular shade of blue? Red Creek's main street looked like a war zone. The bank's front windows were shattered, smoke pouring from the entrance where the safe had been blown. 3 bodies lay in the street. Abraham Marsh, the bank owner, Tom Chen, Samuel's younger brother, who'd been working as a teller, and Sheriff Wyatt, who'd apparently tried to mount a defense and paid the ultimate price. More wounded sat or lay propped against buildings, townspeople trying to render aid. The outlaws had hit hard and fast, a surgical strike designed for maximum profit and minimum resistance. Deputy Holloway emerged from the church, blood still streaming from his head wound, moving like a man in a nightmare. "Sheriff's dead," someone told him, and the young deputy's face went white. Elias walked into the street, ignoring the chaos, his eyes fixed on the horizon where dust still hung in the air, marking the outlaws' escape route. Vicente Ruiz appeared beside him, the older man's face carved from stone in fury. "We go after them, now!" But Vicente, they've got a 10-minute head start, fresh horses, and enough firepower to hold off a militia. This from Jack, who'd followed them out. "I want her back too, but riding out unprepared is suicide." "Then we prepare." Vicente turned to face the gathering crowd. "My daughter has been taken. I need men, horses, guns. You need to think clearly," Deputy Holloway said, wiping blood from his eyes. "Those men, I recognize the description. That's the Calhoun gang. They've hit 6 towns in 3 months, killed maybe 20 men, and disappeared across the border every time. Nobody's caught them because they're ghosts. They hit and vanish into territory where law don't reach." "I don't care if they're ghosts," Elias said quietly. "I'm going after them." Holloway looked at him with something between pity and respect. "Son, you're a farmer. You ever killed a man?" "No." "Ever tracked someone through hostile territory?" "No." "Then you ride out after the Calhoun gang. You're dead in 3 days. They'll see you coming, ambush you, and leave your body for the buzzards." Holloway's voice softened. "I'm sorry about your bride, but throwing your life away won't bring her back." "He's right," Jack said. "Elias, I know what you're feeling, but you don't." Elias turned to face them, and something in his expression made Jack step back. "You don't know. None of you do. That was my wife. Maybe not legal official yet, but in every way that matters, that was my wife they took. And you're telling me to just... what? Accept it? File a report? Hope the territorial marshal eventually gets around to investigating?" "I'm telling you to be smart," Jack said. "Vicente, talk sense to him." But Vicente was staring at Elias with a new expression, recognition of something familiar. "No," the older man said slowly. "He's right. We go after them, but we go smart. We get the right men, the right supplies. We track them professional." "You need a bounty hunter," a new voice said. They turned to find Martha Gaines, the boarding house owner, standing in the doorway of her establishment. She was a woman in her 60s, steel-haired and steel-spined, who'd buried 2 husbands and ran her boarding house with the efficiency of a military quartermaster. "There's a man staying here," she continued. "Been here 3 days. He's a tracker, bounty hunter. Came through chasing some outlaw who turned out to already be dead. He's the kind of man who might know how to find people who don't want to be found." Hope flared in Elias's chest. "Where is he, White?" "Room upstairs. But he's not cheap, and he's not charitable. You want his help, you'll have to pay for it." "I'll pay anything," Elias said immediately. "You don't have anything," Jack pointed out gently. "Your farm's mortgaged. You got maybe $20 to your name." "Then I'll find a way. Where's this bounty hunter?" Martha studied him for a long moment. "Room 4. Name's Silas Vane. Be careful. He's the kind of man who looks at people and sees dollar signs, not souls." Elias was already moving toward the boarding house, Vicente following close behind. Jack called after them, but Elias didn't slow down. Every second they stood talking was another second the gang got further away, another second Isabella spent in their hands. The boarding house interior was dim after the harsh sunlight. Elias's eyes adjusted slowly as he climbed the stairs, Vicente's heavy footfalls behind him. Room 4 was at the end of the hall. Elias didn't bother knocking, just opened the door and walked into whatever came next. The man inside was cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. He didn't look up when they entered, didn't acknowledge their presence in any way. He simply continued working oil into the weapon's mechanisms with practiced efficiency. Silas Vane looked to be in his mid-30s, Lean like a man who forgot to eat regularly, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that were colorless in the room's dim light. He wore no coat despite the day's heat, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with old scars. A gun belt hung on the bedpost within easy reach. "Martha sent you," he said without looking up. Statement, not question. "The Calhoun gang just robbed our bank," Elias said. "They took your bride." "I know. Heard the whole thing from up here. Also heard you tell half the town you're going after them." Vane finally looked up, and his eyes were the gray of winter skies over frozen plains. "You'll die." "Then help us." "Why would I do that?" "Because we'll pay you," Vicente said. "Name your price. $200. Half up front, half when I deliver Calhoun to whatever law wants him most." Vane set down the rifle, leaned back in his chair. "I'm a bounty hunter, not a rescue service. I find criminals, bring them in, collect payment. Your daughter's a complication, not a contract." "She's a human being," Elias said, his hands clenching into fists. "She's also likely dead or worse by now," Vane said with the casual brutality of a man stating obvious facts. "Calhoun's gang has a reputation. They take women sometimes, use them for entertainment, or sell them to worse men across the border. Either way, your romantic notions about rescue are about 3 hours too late." Elias moved without thinking, crossing the room in 2 strides and grabbing Vane by the shirt. "You son of a—" Vane's hand moved like a snake striking. Suddenly, there was a knife at Elias's throat, the blade cold against his skin, Vane's expression unchanged. "Second time today someone's grabbed me without permission," Vane said calmly. "I killed the first one. You want to be smarter than him? You'll let go real slow and step back real careful." Vicente had drawn an old revolver from somewhere, pointing it at Vane with shaking hands. "You let him go." "He lets go first. Otherwise we all bleed, and I'm the only one who'll survive it." Elias released Vane's shirt, stepped back. The knife disappeared so quickly he almost doubted it had been there. "You done acting stupid?" Vane asked. "My daughter," Vicente started, "is gone. Accept it. Grieve. Move on." Vane picked up his rifle again. "That's my professional advice, free of charge. You want me to hunt Calhoun? That's $200, and you accept that the girl's probably dead. I'm not risking my life for sentiment." Elias stared at this man who spoke of Isabella's death like discussing weather patterns. Something crystallized in his chest, a cold, hard certainty. "Then I'll do it myself," he said quietly. Vane actually laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. You can't even throw a punch correctly. Calhoun will gut you before you get within 10 miles of him." "Maybe, but I'll die trying, which is better than standing here listening to you tell me to give up." Something shifted in Vane's expression, not respect exactly, but perhaps a faint recognition of something familiar. He studied Elias for a long moment. "You know how to track?" "No." "Shoot?" "Some. Hunting, mostly." "Survive in hostile territory with no supplies and killers hunting you?" "I'll learn." "You'll die learning." Vane sighed, a sound of profound irritation. "How much money do you actually have?" $20, Vicente said. "Maybe 30, if we pool resources." $30 to chase the most dangerous gang currently operating in the borderlands. Vane shook his head. "You people are determined to commit suicide, aren't you?" "If you won't help, we'll find someone who will," Elias said, turning toward the door. "Wait." Elias stopped. Vane was quiet for a moment, some internal calculation happening behind those cold eyes. "I'll take you," he said finally. "Not for the money, for professional curiosity." "What does that mean?" Vicente asked suspiciously. "It means I want to see if you've actually got the spine to do this, or if you'll break the first time things get hard. Men like you, farmers, shopkeepers, citizens, you talk tough when emotions run high. But when it's cold night in hostile territory and you're hungry and scared and every instinct says turn back, that's when I see who you really are." Vane stood, began gathering his gear with practiced efficiency. "Call it an experiment in human nature. And if we prove we don't have the spine," Elias asked, "then I leave you somewhere survivable and continue alone. Either way, I'm going after Calhoun. He's worth money, and I need money. You two are just additional variables in the equation." It was perhaps the least inspiring recruitment speech Elias had ever heard, but it was also the only offer they had. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Dawn tomorrow. That gives you time to prepare, say goodbyes, write letters to loved ones explaining your stupid decisions." Vane pulled on a coat despite the heat, began strapping on his gun belt. "Meet me at the livery. Bring a horse, a rifle if you have one, whatever ammunition you can scrape together, and the $30. Don't bring sentimentality, don't bring hope, and definitely don't bring expectations of heroic rescues. We're tracking criminals through hell. Act accordingly." Vicente and Elias left the room in silence. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting Red Creek in shades of amber and blood. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation that felt surreal. Elias returned to his small farm, the plot of land that had consumed 3 years of his life, the place where he'd imagined building a future with Isabella. He packed light, dried meat, hardtack, a canteen, the rifle he used for hunting, 2 boxes of ammunition he couldn't really afford. Samuel Chen provided additional supplies, rope, matches, a knife, refusing payment. "Bring her back," was all he said. Jack Brennan was less supportive. "You're going to die out there," he said bluntly over whiskey in the saloon that evening. "Vane's right about one thing. You're not built for this kind of violence." "Then I'll rebuild myself," Elias said. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the memory of Isabella's face as they dragged her away. "That's not how it works. Men don't just become killers because they want to. It takes what? Years of practice? Special training? I don't have time for that, Jack. Every hour I wait is another hour she's with them. Or another hour she's already dead, and you're chasing ghosts." Elias slammed his glass down hard enough to crack it. Don't you dare say that again." Jack held up his hands. "I'm trying to prepare you for reality. You're walking into a nightmare, and I don't want to watch you destroy yourself." "I'm already destroyed," Elias said quietly. "This morning, I was going to marry the woman I love. Tonight, she's gone and 3 people are dead and Red Creek's bank is empty. I'm already living in a nightmare. At least this way, I'm doing something about it." He left the saloon before Jack could respond, walked through Red Creek's dark streets one last time. Tomorrow, he'd ride out into a world he didn't understand, chasing men who would kill him without hesitation, guided by a bounty hunter who saw him as an amusing experiment. The smart thing would be to stay. Rebuild his life. Accept the loss and move forward, however painful that forward might be. But Elias had spent his life being smart, being cautious, playing by rules written by other men. And where had it gotten him? Standing in a dusty town wearing a borrowed suit, watching the woman he loved disappear into hell. No more being smart. No more being cautious. Time to see what kind of man he actually was. He spent the night on the floor of his cabin, unable to face the bed where he'd imagined Isabella would eventually sleep beside him. When dawn broke, pale and cold despite the heat that would come later, Elias rose, strapped on his gun belt, picked up his rifle, and walked toward the livery where Silas Vane and Vicente Ruiz waited. The bounty hunter looked him over with clinical detachment. "You look like hell. Didn't sleep. Get used to it. We'll be doing a lot of not sleeping." Vane swung into his saddle with practiced ease. His horse was a big roan gelding, scarred and mean-looking. "Last chance to turn back. No shame in admitting you're not cut out for this." "I'm not turning back." Vicente mounted his own horse, an older mare but sturdy. The older man's face was set in lines of grim determination. Vane studied them both, then nodded slowly. "All right then. We ride hard, we ride quiet, and we follow my lead. You question my decisions, I leave you behind. You slow us down, I leave you behind. You prove to be more liability than asset, I leave you behind. Clear?" "Clear," Elias said. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, heading south toward territory where the border meant nothing and violence wrote the only law that mattered. Red Creek fell away behind them, growing smaller with each step until it vanished entirely into the vast expanse of frontier that stretched ahead, empty miles of dust and brush and stone that had broken better men than Elias Crowe. Somewhere out there, Isabella waited. Or she was already dead. Or she was enduring horrors that would destroy who she'd been. Either way, Elias was riding toward truth. And whatever that truth turned out to be, he would face it like a man who'd finally stopped running from who he needed to become. The land swallowed them, 3 riders becoming specks against endless sky, pursuing ghosts and vengeance in equal measure. The land changed within hours of leaving Red Creek, transforming from stubborn farmland into something actively hostile. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a physical presence that pressed down on everything living. Elias's borrowed suit jacket came off first, then his vest, until he rode in just his shirt with sleeves rolled up, already soaked through with sweat. Vane set a punishing pace. The bounty hunter seemed immune to the heat, sitting his saddle with the stillness of a man conserving energy for when it truly mattered. He didn't speak except to occasionally point out a track in the dust. Hoofprints, disturbed stones, places where the gang had stopped to water their horses. 7 riders, Vane said at one such stop, kneeling to examine the ground with the focus of a man reading a book. They're not trying to hide their trail. That's arrogance, or they think no one's stupid enough to follow. How long ago? Vicente asked. The older man was handling the ride better than Elias expected, though his face had taken on a gray cast that spoke of pain being endured rather than absent. 4 hours, maybe 5. They're moving steady but not racing, confident. Vane stood, his eyes scanning the horizon. They'll stop for the night eventually. Men like this, they're not worried about pursuit, so they'll make camp, rest their horses properly. That's when we start gaining ground. We ride through the night, Elias asked. Part of it, enough to close the gap without killing our horses. Vane swung back into his saddle. You two know how to stay quiet on night trail. Both men shook their heads. Then you'll learn, or you'll get us killed. When I signal quiet, you don't speak, you don't cough, you don't do anything that carries sound. Out here, noise travels. A voice can carry 2 miles on a still night. That means they hear us long before we see them. They rode on. The landscape grew rougher, rolling hills giving way to broken country full of arroyos and rocky outcrops. Good ambush territory, Elias realized. A man could hide a small army in this terrain, and you'd never know until bullets started flying. His body began protesting the constant riding. Elias considered himself in decent shape from farm work, but that kind of labor was different. Short bursts of intense effort followed by rest. This was relentless, his thighs burning, his back aching, his hands cramping on the reins. Vane noticed, of course. The man noticed everything. You need to stop? He called back without slowing. No, Elias managed. That wasn't charity. If you can't continue, tell me now. I'd rather know your limits before we're in hostile territory. I can continue. Vane's expression suggested he doubted that, but was willing to let Elias prove himself wrong through experience. By afternoon, the heat became genuinely dangerous. The air shimmered in waves that made the horizon uncertain. Elias drained his canteen faster than he should have, his body demanding water it couldn't spare. Vicente was worse. The older man swayed in his saddle, his breathing labored. When they finally stopped to rest the horses at a dried creek bed that still held a few stagnant pools, Vicente barely made it to the ground before his legs gave out. How much water you got left? Vane asked Elias. Maybe a third. That'll get you killed by tomorrow. Vane pulled out his own canteen, took a measured sip, then handed it to Vicente. Small sips. Let it sit in your mouth before swallowing. Your body needs time to absorb it. You don't have to, Vicente started. I'm not being charitable. I'm keeping my companions alive long enough to be useful. Vane's tone was flat, clinical. You die of heat stroke. That's 1 less gun if we catch up to Calhoun. While Vicente drank, Vane examined the stagnant pools. He pulled out a piece of cloth, strained water through it into his canteen, added something from a small vial. Purification tablets, he explained, seeing Elias watch. Water out here will kill you as sure as a bullet if you drink it wrong. Cholera, dysentery, 6 other ways to die slowly. He offered the treated water to Elias. Fill your canteen, it'll taste like tin and regret, but it'll keep you breathing. Elias filled his canteen, tried a sip. Vane hadn't lied. The water tasted metallic and wrong, but it was wet, and that was enough. How long have you been doing this? Elias asked. Hunting men? 12 years, give or take. Vane was studying the ground again, reading sign that Elias couldn't see. Started as an army tracker during the border conflicts. Turned out I was better at finding people who didn't want to be found than following orders, so I went private. You ever lose a trail? Twice. Once the man I was tracking fell into a ravine and died before I could catch him. Once a gang crossed into Comanche territory, and I had enough sense not to follow. Vane looked up, his colorless eyes fixing on Elias. I don't lose trails because I quit too early. I lose them because the universe occasionally intervenes. Won't happen this time, though. How can you be sure? Because Calhoun's headed somewhere specific. This isn't random flight. He's got a destination, which means a pattern, which means I can predict where he'll be. Vicente had recovered enough to speak. Where's he going? Best guess? Santiago Crossing. It's a town, if you can call it that, about 60 miles south of here. Sits right on the border, technically belongs to nobody, functionally controlled by whoever has the most guns on any given day. It's where men like Calhoun go to spend their money and trade their stolen goods. Including women, Elias said quietly. Vane nodded. Including women. There's a trade that runs through Santiago Crossing, flesh trade. Girls taken from raids or bought from desperate families or just stolen like your bride. They get moved through there to buyers further south. Rich men who want servants or worse. The words hit Elias like physical blows. He'd understood intellectually what might be happening to Isabella, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way that threatened to break something inside him. Then we get there first, Elias said. Cut them off before— We can't, Vane interrupted. They've got too much lead and they know the direct routes. We try to cut them off, we'll miss them completely and lose the trail. We have to follow, close the gap, and hit them when opportunity presents. While she suffers, Vicente said, his voice breaking. Yes, while she suffers, that's the reality. Vane stood, began checking his horse's hooves with practiced efficiency. You want me to lie to you, to tell you stories about how we'll catch them in time and she'll be fine? I can do that. Won't make it true, but I can say the words if it helps you sleep better. How can you be so cold about this? Elias demanded. Because cold keeps me alive. Emotion makes you stupid, makes you take risks you shouldn't, trust people you can't, see hope where there's only hard facts. Vane finished with his horse, turned to face them both. You want to save her? Then you learn to be cold too. You bury the fear and the rage and the desperate love. You bury it so deep it can't affect your decisions. Then maybe, if we're very lucky and very smart, we catch these men and you get her back. And if we're not lucky? Vicente asked. Then you learn what I learned 12 years ago, that the universe doesn't care about your feelings, and justice is just a word men use to make themselves feel better about vengeance. They mounted up again, rode on into the growing afternoon heat. Elias tried to bury his emotions like Vane suggested, tried to find that cold center where fear couldn't touch him. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isabella being dragged through that church door, heard her fighting, felt the absolute helplessness of watching it happen. The rage wouldn't bury. It sat in his chest like a living coal, burning hotter with each mile. Maybe that's what Vane meant by cold. Not the absence of emotion, but the control of it. Using it as fuel without letting it drive the vehicle. As the sun began its descent, the terrain changed again. They entered a region of scattered rocks and twisted brush that looked like the land itself was trying to escape the heat. Vane's posture shifted slightly, still relaxed, but with an added alertness that made Elias suddenly aware of how exposed they were. What is it? Elias whispered. Probably nothing, but this is good ambush country, and there are other men in these badlands besides Calhoun. Vane's hand rested casually on his rifle. Keep your eyes moving. Look for things that don't belong, straight lines in nature, colors that don't match, anything that catches your attention even if you can't say why. They rode in silence for another hour, the tension slowly easing as they cleared the rocky section without incident. But the experience left Elias understanding something new. Out here, every moment carried the potential for violence. The frontier wasn't just harsh land and difficult conditions. It was a place where death waited around every blind corner, patient and certain. They made camp as full darkness fell, in a small depression that would hide their fire from distant eyes. Vane wouldn't allow much of a fire anyway, just enough to heat coffee and cook a small meal of salt pork and hardtack. First watch is mine, Vane announced, settling against a rock with his rifle across his knees. Vicente, you take second. Elias, you take third. 2-hour shifts. Anyone sleeps through their watch, we're done traveling together. You think they'd double back? Elias asked. Try to ambush us? Calhoun? No, he doesn't know we're following yet, and even if he did, he wouldn't bother. He thinks we're nothing. Vane poured coffee from a battered pot, the liquid black as tar. But there are other dangers, bandits, desperate men. Apache. If we drift too far west, sleep light and wake fast. Vicente was already settling into his bedroll, his body clearly past its limits. Elias wanted to check on the older man to offer some reassurance, but what could he say? They were chasing killers into hell, and the best-case scenario was a gunfight they'd probably lose. Instead, he lay down on hard ground, using his saddle as a pillow, and stared up at stars so thick they looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. The frontier sky was different from what he'd known back east. Bigger somehow, more indifferent. Those stars had watched uncountable men die in this land, and they'd keep watching long after Elias joined that count. Sleep came fitfully, full of dreams that jerked him awake in cold sweats. In one, he arrived too late and found Isabella's body in a shallow grave. In another, he caught the gang but froze when it came time to shoot, and Calhoun killed him while laughing. In the worst one, he made it home to discover Isabella had forgotten him, the trauma having erased everything they'd been to each other. Vicente's hand on his shoulder woke him for real. "Your watch," the older man whispered. Elias sat up, every muscle screaming protest. 2 hours of sleep on rocky ground had left him feeling worse than if he'd stayed awake. But Vane was already asleep, or appeared to be, and Vicente crawled into his bedroll without another word. The night was cold in that way frontier nights always were, the temperature having plunged 40 degrees from the day's peak. Elias wrapped his coat tighter, gripped his rifle, and tried to make sense of the darkness around their camp. Sounds he'd never noticed before suddenly seemed deafening. Small animals moving through brush, wind rattling through rocks, the horses shifting and breathing. Every noise could be a threat, or nothing, and he had no experience to tell the difference. An hour into his watch, something larger moved in the darkness beyond the firelight. Elias brought his rifle up, heart hammering, finger tight on the trigger. "Easy," Vane's voice came from behind him, barely a whisper. "Just a coyote. You can tell by the sound of its feet, lighter than a man's, quicker." "I thought you were asleep," Elias whispered back. "I was." "You tensing up woke me." Vane appeared beside him, his movements completely silent. "First rule of night watch, don't shoot at sounds. If you can't see a target clearly enough to identify it as a threat, you don't fire. Otherwise, you give away our position to every dangerous thing within 2 miles. "Sorry," Elias said. "Don't apologize. Learn." Vane settled back against his rock. "I'll stay up with you. You need the lesson more than I need the sleep." For the next hour, Vane taught him how to read the night, how to let his eyes adjust fully rather than staring at the fire, how to use peripheral vision to catch movement, how to identify different animal sounds and separate them from human approach. "You're doing better than I expected," Vane admitted as dawn began to gray the eastern sky. "Most city men, they panic at every shadow. You got enough farm in you to know that darkness doesn't automatically mean danger." "My father used to wake me for night checks on the stock," Elias said. "Back before I came west, he'd say a farmer's work doesn't stop for sunset." "Smart man. He's still alive?" "No, fever took him when I was 17. That's when I decided to head west, try to build something of my own." "And you picked Red Creek," Vane said. "That was your first mistake. That land's been fought over for 200 years. Spanish, Mexican, American, Apache, Comanche. Everyone's wanted it. Nobody's kept it. It's cursed ground." "I didn't believe in curses," Elias said. "Just hard work and fair dealing." "And now?" Elias thought about his wedding day, about Isabella being dragged away, about the 3 corpses in Red Creek Street. "Now I believe in bullets. Everything else is just stories people tell themselves to feel safe." Vane actually smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're learning faster than I thought you would. Maybe you'll survive this after all." They broke camp at first light, ate a cold breakfast of jerky and water, and rode out as the sun cleared the horizon. Vicente looked worse, his face drawn, his eyes sunken. The older man was running on pure determination, his body already past reasonable limits. "We need to talk about your father-in-law," Vane said quietly to Elias when Vicente rode ahead to check something he'd spotted in the rocks. "He's holding up," Elias said. "He's dying. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he's got maybe 3 more days of this pace in him before his heart gives out or his body just quits." Vane's expression was flat, stating facts without judgment. "Question is what we do about it. We can slow down, let him rest more, then we lose Calhoun's trail completely, and your bride ends up wherever women end up in the flesh trade." Vane paused. "Or we send him back, continue with just us two." He'd never agree to that. "I know. So we're going to ride him until he drops, and then we'll face that decision when it comes." Vane pulled out his rifle, checked the action. "I'm telling you now so you can prepare yourself. At some point, you might have to choose between saving Vicente and saving Isabella. Start thinking about what you'll do when that moment comes." The words settled into Elias's gut like stones. He wanted to argue, to insist they'd find a way to save everyone. But Vane's lessons were sinking in. Out here, there were no guaranteed happy endings. Just choices, each one carrying weight that would break a weaker man. They caught up to Calhoun's trail at a water stop around noon. The gang had rested here, let their horses drink from a spring that bubbled up from between rocks. They'd been here maybe 6 hours ago. "We're gaining," Vane said with satisfaction. "They're confident enough to take long breaks. That arrogance is going to cost them." "How much further to Santiago Crossing?" Vicente asked. 2 days at their pace, maybe a day and a half if we really push." Vane studied the tracks, his expression thoughtful. "Question is whether we try to intercept them before they reach town or wait until they're settled in and let their guard down." "Waiting means more time for them to—" Elias couldn't finish the sentence. "Yeah, but hitting them on the trail means catching them when they're alert, probably in terrain they've chosen. In town, they'll be drunk, distracted, separated." Vane straightened. "I know which I'd prefer tactically, but it's your call. She's your bride." The weight of that decision pressed down on Elias. Attack too soon and they might all die. Wait too long and Isabella might be sold. Moved somewhere they'd never find her. "We get ahead of them," Elias decided. "We know where they're going. You said there's only so many routes through this country. We find a place to hit them before Santiago Crossing, somewhere we choose." Vane studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's the right call. Risky, but right. You're thinking like a tactician instead of a desperate man. There's hope for you yet." They changed their approach then, leaving the direct trail and swinging wide to the west. The terrain grew even rougher, rocky hills that required leading their horses over loose scree, dry valleys that baked in the afternoon sun like nature's own ovens. But Vane navigated it all with the certainty of a man who'd memorized this landscape through hard experience. He found water where Elias would have sworn none existed. He read the land's contours and predicted where Calhoun would travel to avoid the worst terrain. By late afternoon of the second day pursuing Calhoun, they'd reached a narrow canyon that Vane identified as the most likely route toward Santiago Crossing. "This is it," he said, studying the canyon's features with a professional eye. "They'll come through here probably tomorrow afternoon. Canyon walls are too steep for horses to climb easily, which means they'll be funneled through the middle. Good kill zone if we set it up right." "We're going to ambush them," Elias said, feeling the reality of what that meant. "That's the plan. 7 of them, 3 of us, and they've got your bride with them, which complicates firing solutions." Vane began pointing out positions. "Vicente, you'll be up on that ridge with your rifle. Your job is to pin them down, make them think there are more of us than there are. Elias, you'll be opposite him, creating a crossfire. I'll be at the canyon mouth. When they're fully committed to the canyon, I close the door behind them." "They'll kill Isabella if we start shooting," Vicente said, his voice rough. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll use her as a shield, which gives us more time to maneuver. Or maybe in the chaos she gets clear and runs." Vane's expression was grim. "I'm not going to lie. This is a low-percentage play. Best case, we kill most of them and rescue her. Worst case, we die and she ends up in the same place she'd have reached anyway. But it's the best chance we've got." That night, camped in the rocks above the canyon, Elias couldn't sleep at all. Tomorrow he would try to kill men. Not hunt animals, not target practice. Actually aim a weapon at another human being and pull the trigger with intent to end a life. The thought should have horrified him. A month ago, it would have. But sitting in darkness with his rifle across his knees, thinking about Isabella and what she was enduring, Elias felt something colder than horror. He felt ready. "You ever killed a man?" he asked Vane, who was maintaining their small fire. 23, Vane said without hesitation. 23 I'm certain of, anyway. Might be more I wounded who died later, but I only count the ones I saw go down permanent. Does it get easier? No, it gets familiar, which is different. First man's the hardest because you don't know what it'll feel like. After that, you know. And you have to decide if you can live with that knowledge. Vane looked up from the fire. You asking because you're scared or because you want permission? Both, maybe. Can't give you either. Fear's your own to manage. Permission's something you grant yourself. Vane poured coffee, offered a cup to Elias. But I'll tell you this. Tomorrow, when you've got a man in your sights, you'll have maybe 2 seconds to decide. Think too long, you're dead. So decide now, tonight, whether you can do it. Make peace with the choice while you've got time to think clear. Elias sipped the bitter coffee, felt it burn down to his stomach. Could he kill another man? 6 hours ago, he'd have said maybe. Now, thinking about Isabella, about Calhoun's cold eyes and casual cruelty, about the gang member who'd grabbed her. I can do it, he said. You sure? No, but I'll do it anyway. Vane nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to test whether you mean that. Dawn came too fast and too slow. Elias's body was exhausted, screaming for real rest, but his mind wouldn't stop racing through scenarios. Each one ended in blood, sometimes his, sometimes Isabella's, sometimes everyone's. They positioned themselves as Vane had planned. Vicente took the western ridge, his old rifle loaded and ready. Elias settled into rocks on the eastern side, his hands sweating despite the morning cold. Vane disappeared toward the canyon's southern mouth, moving like smoke through the landscape. Then came the waiting. Hours of it. The sun climbed, temperature rose, and still the canyon remained empty. Elias's muscles cramped from holding position. His mouth went dry. He drained his canteen without thinking, then regretted it when he realized he had no more water and no way to get any without abandoning his position. Noon passed. Then early afternoon. Doubt crept in. What if Calhoun had chosen a different route? What if Vane had miscalculated? What if they were sitting in an ambush position while the gang rode unmolested toward Santiago Crossing? Then Vicente's rifle cracked once. The signal. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. They were coming. He saw dust first, rising from the canyon's northern approach. Then he heard voices, men laughing about something. The sound made him sick. Casual humor from men who'd murdered and kidnapped without remorse, now joking like they were on a Sunday ride. The first rider appeared around the canyon bend. Not Calhoun, one of the younger gang members, riding loose and confident. Behind him came 2 more, then Isabella. She rode a horse in the middle of the group, her hands bound to the saddle horn, her wedding dress now torn and filthy. Even from a distance, Elias could see bruises on her face, dried blood at the corner of her mouth. But she sat straight, her head up, defiant even in captivity. Behind her came Calhoun and the rest of his gang, 7 riders total just as Vane had predicted. They entered the canyon without caution, talking among themselves, completely unaware they were riding into a trap. Calhoun was saying something about Santiago Crossing, about finding buyers, about prices for... Elias stopped listening. His rifle was up, his finger on the trigger, his breathing shallow. He had a clear shot at one of the gang members, a man in a brown hat who rode third in line. The plan was to wait for Vane's signal, wait until they were all committed to the canyon, nowhere to run easily. Wait for the perfect moment. Elias waited. The gang rode deeper into the kill zone, 50 yards, 40, 30. Calhoun said something about making camp early today, giving the men time to enjoy their prize before selling her off. The other gang members laughed. Something in Elias's chest turned to ice and fury combined. Vane's rifle shot shattered the afternoon silence like a thunderclap. One of the gang members, the one in the brown hat that Elias had been targeting, jerked in his saddle and tumbled sideways, blood spraying from his shoulder. For a frozen heartbeat, everything stopped. The gang members stared at their wounded companion, unable to process what had just happened. Then Vicente fired from the western ridge, and chaos erupted. Horses screamed and reared, men shouted, dove for cover, drew weapons. Calhoun was yelling orders, trying to organize a response, but his men were panicking, firing wildly at rocks and shadows. Elias found his target, a man dismounting behind a boulder, rifle coming up to search for Vicente. The man's face was visible, young, scared, human. Elias pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. Downrange, the man stumbled, clutched at his side, went down behind the boulder. Elias had just shot a man, maybe killed him. The realization should have paralyzed him, should have made him vomit or freeze or break down. Instead, he worked the bolt action, chambered another round, searched for his next target. The fight lasted maybe 90 seconds, though it felt like hours. Vane appeared at the canyon's south entrance, his rifle spitting fire with mechanical precision. Vicente kept up steady fire from above. Elias shot twice more, hitting one man in the leg and missing another completely. But 3 against 7, even with surprise and position, wasn't enough. Calhoun rallied his men faster than Vane had predicted. The gang leader was smart, experienced, had been in firefights before. He got his men organized, got them returning coordinated fire that forced Elias to duck behind cover. "Fall back," Vane's voice echoed through the canyon. "Elias, Vicente, fall back now!" Elias hesitated. Isabella was down there, still tied to her horse, the animal rearing in terror as bullets flew around it. "Now!" Vane shouted again. Elias ran, scrambling through rocks away from his position. Bullets cracked past him, ricocheting off stone. He heard Vicente doing the same from the other ridge, heard the older man's labored breathing. They'd wounded 3 gang members and killed none. They'd revealed themselves without achieving the objective, and now they were running for their lives through terrain that wanted to kill them as surely as Calhoun's men did. The ambush had failed. They ran for 3 miles through terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and shred skin. Elias's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but terror kept him moving. Behind them, gunfire still echoed through the canyon, Calhoun's men shooting at shadows, at rocks, at anything that might be a target. Vane led them through a maze of arroyos and broken ground that would have been impossible to navigate without his knowledge of the land. He moved with purpose, each turn deliberate, clearly following some mental map that only he could see. Vicente fell twice, his age and exhaustion finally claiming their due. The second time, he stayed down, gasping like a landed fish. "Get up," Vane said, not unkindly but with absolute firmness. "We stop here. We die here." "I can't," Vicente managed between heaving breaths. "My chest. Something's wrong." Elias grabbed the older man under the arms, hauled him upright through sheer determination. "You don't get to quit. Not now. Not when we're this close." "Close to what? Getting killed?" But Vicente stumbled forward, leaning heavily on Elias. They pushed on until the sun began its descent, until the canyon was miles behind them and the immediate pursuit had faded. Vane finally stopped at a cluster of rocks that formed a natural defensive position, his eyes constantly scanning their back trail. "We got lucky," he said flatly. "Calhoun could have run us down if he'd committed to pursuit. The fact that he didn't means he's either smart enough to avoid chasing armed men into unknown terrain, or he doesn't see us as enough of a threat to bother with. We wounded 3 of his men," Elias protested. "We annoyed him. There's a difference." Vane pulled out his canteen, took a measured sip. "But we also revealed ourselves, which changes the game completely. Now he knows someone's hunting him. He'll be more careful, more alert. The advantage we had is gone." Vicente sat heavily against a rock, his face gray, his breathing still labored. "My daughter, we left her there. We had no choice," Vane said. "The ambush failed. We could have died trying to push it, or we could retreat and try again. I chose retreat." "You chose wrong," Vicente said, his voice gaining strength from anger. "She was right there. We should have—" "What? Charged 7 armed men? Gotten ourselves killed in some romantic gesture that accomplishes nothing?" Vane's tone remained cold, factual. "I make tactical decisions, not emotional ones. If you can't handle that, you're welcome to strike out on your own." "Don't," Elias said quietly. Both men looked at him. "Don't fight each other. That's what will get us killed faster than anything Calhoun could do." Silence fell, broken only by Vicente's labored breathing and the distant cry of a hawk riding thermals in the cooling air. "We need a new plan," Elias continued, his mind working through possibilities. "The ambush didn't work. What's next?" Vane studied him for a long moment, something like approval flickering in those cold eyes. "Next is we get to Santiago Crossing ahead of them. They'll be delayed now. They've got wounded to tend, and they'll be watching their back trail. That gives us maybe 12 hours to reach town first, learn the layout, and figure out where they'll take her. And then? Then we take her back. Not in a firefight, not in some dramatic showdown. We wait until opportunity presents itself. We strike fast, and we disappear before anyone knows what happened." "You make it sound simple," Vicente said bitterly. "It's not. It's actually nearly impossible. But it's got better odds than another direct assault." Vane stood, began checking his weapons with mechanical precision. "We rest here for 2 hours. Then we move through the night. By dawn, we need to be in Santiago Crossing looking like travelers, not fugitives." Those 2 hours passed in tense silence. Elias tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isabella on that horse, saw the bruises on her face, heard Calhoun's casual discussion of selling her. The image burned into his brain like a brand. He'd failed her, had the shot, had the moment, and he'd waited for Vane's signal like a good soldier following orders. Maybe if he'd fired first, fired faster. Maybe if he'd been willing to risk everything in that moment. "Stop," Vane said from across their small camp. "I can hear you thinking from here, and it's going to drive you crazy." "I should have." There's no should have in tactical situations. You made the decisions you made based on the information you had. The ambush failed because Calhoun's better than I gave him credit for, not because you hesitated. Vane's expression softened slightly, which made him look almost human. "But that moment when you didn't freeze, when you actually took the shot, that's when I knew you might survive this." "I shot a man," Elias said quietly. "Maybe killed him." "You shot an outlaw who kidnapped your bride and murdered your neighbors. Don't romanticize it into something complicated. He chose violence as a way of life. You just showed him what that choice costs." "It doesn't feel like I thought it would." "What does it feel like?" Elias considered the question. "Like something broke inside me, but also like something else got stronger. Does that make sense?" "More than you know." Vane checked his pocket watch. "Time to move. Vicente, can you ride?" The older man struggled to his feet, his hand pressed to his chest. "I can do whatever needs doing." They moved through darkness, leading their horses through terrain too rough to risk riding. The temperature plunged as it always did in the desert night, and Elias shivered in his coat while sweat still dried cold on his back. Santiago Crossing appeared near dawn, a collection of buildings that looked like they'd been assembled from salvage and spite. It sat in a valley where 2 dry rivers met, surrounded by hills that provided natural defense against both law and conscience. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and even from a distance, Elias could hear the sounds of a town that never quite slept. "Welcome to the end of the world," Vane said quietly. "Past this point, there's no law, no rules, no pretense of civilization, just men with guns and the will to use them." They approached carefully, circling to enter from the east where travelers would naturally arrive. Vane made them stop to clean up as best they could, washing dust from their faces, straightening their clothes, generally trying to look less like fugitives and more like weary travelers. "When we get in there, we're strangers passing through," Vane instructed. "We don't ask questions about the Calhoun gang directly. We listen, we watch, and we learn the rhythms of the town. Elias, you're my hired hand. Vicente, you're his uncle, family traveling together. We've got business further south, just stopping to rest our horses and resupply. Simple story, easy to remember, hard to disprove." The town's main street was already active despite the early hour. Men stumbled between saloons and brothels, their night's entertainment not yet concluded. Vendors set up stalls selling everything from food to firearms. A fight was happening outside one building, 2 men circling each other with knives while others placed bets. No one paid them much attention as they rode in. Santiago Crossing saw too many strangers for 3 more to matter. Vane led them to a stable run by a Mexican man who introduced himself as Jesus. The man's eyes were sharp, missing nothing, but his demeanor remained professionally neutral. "How long you staying?" Jesus asked in accented English. "A day," maybe 2, Vane replied. Depends on how fast we can conduct our business. What kind of business? The kind that doesn't concern stable keepers. Vane's tone was flat but not hostile. He handed over coins. We need the horses fed and watered, and we need a recommendation for a place to stay that's relatively clean and relatively safe. Jesus pocketed the money, considered. Casa de Maria, 3 buildings down. She runs a boarding house. Expensive, but the beds don't have fleas and she doesn't ask questions. Sounds perfect. As they unloaded their gear, Vicente leaned close to Elias. How do we find her in this place? We don't find her, Vane said, having overheard. We let Calhoun bring her to us. He's got a pattern. I've been tracking him long enough to know it. He'll come here, sell his stolen goods, spend some of the money on supplies and entertainment, then auction off the girl to whoever offers the best price. That usually happens in the back room of the biggest saloon. He pointed to a large building at the far end of the street, 3 stories tall with a balcony that wrapped around the second floor. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it the Copper King. That's where it'll happen. Probably tomorrow night, maybe the night after. Gives potential buyers time to gather, drives up the price. Vane shouldered his saddlebags. In the meantime, we establish ourselves as legitimate travelers. We drink, we gamble small, we blend in. And we learn everything we can about this town's layout and rhythms. Casa de Maria turned out to be exactly as advertised. Relatively clean, relatively safe, and absurdly expensive. Maria herself was a woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen every variation of human desperation and developed immunity to all of them. 3 beds, 1 night, paid in advance, she said in English, smoother than Jesus's. No violence in my house, no stealing from other guests, no bringing working girls back to the rooms. Break those rules, I have you thrown out. Probably dead if Juan Carlos is working. He doesn't like rule breakers. They paid, took their room, a small space with 3 cots and a wash basin, and Vane immediately went to the window to study sightlines and escape routes. Vicente, you stay here and rest, he ordered. Your heart's going to give out if you don't slow down, and I need you functional. Elias, you're with me. We're going to walk this town, learn it, understand where everything is and how it connects. I should rest too, Elias said, feeling exhaustion in every cell. You can rest when she's safe. Until then, you stay sharp. Vane checked his revolver, concealed it under his coat. In Santiago Crossing, looking weak is the same as being dead. So you walk like a man who knows how to handle himself, even if you don't yet. Confidence is armor here. They left Vicente in the room and descended to the street. Morning had fully arrived, and Santiago Crossing revealed itself in harsh daylight. It was a town built on vice and violence, every business catering to men who'd left civilized society behind by choice or necessity. Vane walked with purpose but not urgency, his eyes constantly moving. He pointed out important landmarks as they passed. The telegraph office, surprisingly advanced for such a lawless place. The assayer's office, where stolen goods could be converted to currency. The doctor's surgery, identified by bloodstains on the doorframe. The Copper King is the center of power here, Vane explained as they approached the massive saloon. Whoever owns it effectively runs the town. Right now, that's a man called Augustin Wade. Former Confederate officer, fled south after the war when certain activities came to light. He's brutal, smart, and absolutely without morals. If Calhoun's selling your bride, he'll do it with Wade's permission, and Wade will take a cut. Can we buy Wade off? Convince him to help us? Vane actually laughed, a harsh bark of sound. Wade would sell his own mother for the right price, but he'd also kill you for looking at him wrong on a bad day. No, we don't approach Wade. We avoid him, stay beneath his notice, and hope he stays out of our business. They entered the Copper King through swinging doors that had seen better decades. Inside was exactly what Elias expected, a long bar, gaming tables, a stage where a woman sang something mournful in Spanish, and the heavy smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Men filled every corner, their conversations a low rumble of violence planned and executed. Elias recognized types he'd never seen in Red Creek, professional killers with dead eyes, con men with practiced smiles, desperate fools chasing impossible dreams. Vane ordered whiskey at the bar, paid with coins that disappeared into the bartender's apron. The man was huge, scarred, and had the look of someone who'd broken more bones than a doctor had ever set. New faces, the bartender observed. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. Passing through or staying? Passing through, Vane confirmed. Just need to rest our horses and resupply before heading further south. South's dangerous these days. Apache are stirred up about something, and there's talk of bandits working the trade routes. The bartender wiped a glass that would never be truly clean. You carrying anything valuable? Just our lives, and those aren't worth much to anyone but us. The bartender smiled like Vane had passed some kind of test. Smart answer. You need anything while you're here? You come see me. Name's Marcus Tull. I can arrange most things for the right price. I'll keep that in mind. They took their drinks to a corner table where Vane could watch both entrances and the stairs leading to the upper floors. He sipped his whiskey slowly, making it last, while his eyes catalogued every person in the room. See the man at the faro table? He said quietly. The one in the gray coat? Elias followed his gaze to a well-dressed man who looked completely out of place in the rough surroundings. Who is he? If I'm right, he's a buyer. Probably from one of the big ranches further south where they need household staff, and aren't particular about how those staff are acquired. He's got money. You can tell by the coat, the clean hands, the way he carries himself. And he's here in Santiago Crossing, which means he's shopping for something you can't buy in civilized places. The words made Elias's stomach turn. He's here for someone like Isabella, yeah. Probably not the only one. When word gets out that Calhoun's got quality merchandise, the vultures gather. Vane finished his whiskey in one swallow. Which means we're running out of time faster than I thought. If there are already buyers in town, the auction could happen tonight. Then we move tonight. We don't have a plan yet. Moving without a plan is suicide. Then we make a plan. Fast. Elias leaned forward, lowering his voice. What do we need? Vane considered, his mind clearly working through scenarios. We need to know which room they'll keep her in before the auction. We need a distraction big enough to pull attention away from that room. We need an escape route that doesn't lead straight to Wade's men or Calhoun's. And we need all of that to come together perfectly, or we die trying. So find out which room, create chaos, grab her, and run. You make it sound simple, isn't it? In theory. In practice, every step can go wrong in a dozen ways. Vane stood. But you're right about one thing. We're out of time for careful planning, so we improvise. Come on. They spent the next several hours learning the Copper King's layout as thoroughly as possible without arousing suspicion. They gambled at various tables, losing small amounts deliberately while watching how the place functioned. They noted which doors led where, which windows were accessible, where the guards stationed themselves. Marcus Tull, the bartender, proved to be a useful source of information. For the price of drinks and careful questions disguised as idle conversation, he revealed much about how Santiago Crossing operated. You hear about the bank job up in Red Creek? Tull asked at one point, polishing glasses behind the bar. Elias froze, but Vane's expression didn't change. Can't say I did. We've been on the trail for a week. Calhoun gang hit it hard, took $3,000, and killed a few folks in the process. Word is they're heading this way to spend their earnings. Tull grinned. Always good for business when the Calhouns come to town. They spend freely and don't mind sharing. Generous of them, Vane said dryly. They also brought something special this time. A girl, real pretty, educated, not like the usual trash that comes through here. Tull's smile widened. Wade's organizing a private auction tonight. Already got 3 serious buyers lined up. Should be quite the event. Tonight. The word hit Elias like a fist. They had hours, not days. Sounds interesting, Vane said casually. Where's this auction happening? 3rd floor, Wade's private room. By invitation only, so don't get any ideas about attending. Tull leaned closer. But if you're interested in that kind of merchandise, Wade sometimes has leftovers. Girls who didn't fetch the price he wanted, or who got damaged in transit. They go cheaper, but you get what you pay for. Elias felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. Vane must have sensed it because his boot came down on Elias's foot under the bar, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to shock him back to control. We'll keep that in mind, Vane said smoothly. When's this auction supposed to start? Sundown. Wade likes to conduct business as day ends and night begins, symbolic or some such nonsense. Tull moved away to serve another customer. Vane grabbed Elias's arm, steered him toward the door. Outside in the brutal afternoon heat, he finally spoke. "You almost gave us away in there. When he talked about her, your face, anyone watching would have known you had a personal connection." "He was talking about buying her like she's livestock," Elias said through clenched teeth. "I know, and it makes you want to kill everyone in that building, but rage makes you stupid, and stupid gets you dead." Vane looked toward the western sky, calculating time. "We've got maybe 4 hours until sundown. That's not enough time to plan this properly, which means we're going to have to rely on luck and improvisation. I hate relying on luck." "What's the plan?" "Still working on that." Vane started walking back toward Casa de Maria. "But first we need Vicente. If we're doing this, we do it with all 3 of us. 3 guns, 3 bodies, 3 chances to make it work." Vicente was awake when they returned, sitting on his cot and cleaning his old revolver with shaking hands. He looked up when they entered, and something in their expressions told him everything he needed to know. "Tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tonight," Vane confirmed. "3rd floor of the Copper King, Wade's private room. 3 buyers already confirmed, which means she'll be displayed, examined, and sold to whoever offers the most. We've got until sundown to figure out how to stop that." "Then we don't need a complicated plan," Vicente said, his voice gaining strength. "We go in shooting. We kill everyone between us and her, and we take her back." "That's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps," Vane said. "Wade will have guards, professional killers who do this for a living. Calhoun will have his remaining men. The buyers might have bodyguards. We'd be outnumbered 10 to 1, in a building we don't control, with no escape route. We'd be dead in minutes." "Then what do you suggest?" Vane was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through possibilities and discarding them as too risky or too unlikely. Finally, he spoke. "Fire," he said simply. Both men stared at him. "Fire," he repeated. "Santiago Crossing is all wood, tightly packed buildings, no real fire brigade. A good fire in the right place would create chaos, draw everyone's attention, force evacuation of the Copper King. In that chaos, we go in through a back way, get to the 3rd floor, get Isabella, and disappear while everyone else is fighting the flames." "You want to burn down half the town," Elias said slowly. "Not half. Just enough to create the distraction we need. The buildings here are constructed to survive fire. They've probably had a dozen over the years. But the panic is real, and panic is what we need." "People could die," Vicente said. "People are definitely going to die," Vane corrected. "Question is whether it's us or some strangers who chose to live in a lawless town. I know which I prefer." The cold calculation in his voice should have shocked Elias. A month ago, it would have. But sitting in that small room, knowing Isabella was about to be sold like property, Elias found he didn't care much about strangers either. "How do we start the fire?" he asked. "Lamp oil, cloth, spark. We hit one of the smaller buildings on the far end of town, something abandoned or low value. Fire spreads fast in this heat with this wind. By the time it reaches the Copper King, everyone will be evacuating." Vane pulled out a rough map he'd sketched during their earlier reconnaissance. "There's a back staircase here used for deliveries and staff. We go up that way while everyone else is going down the front. Vicente, you're our rear guard. You hold the stairwell. Make sure nobody follows us up or cuts off our retreat." "And if someone does?" Vicente asked. "Then you shoot them. This isn't a mission where we take prisoners or show mercy. Anyone between us and Isabella is an enemy. Act accordingly." They spent the remaining hours preparing. Vane acquired lamp oil from a general store, claiming he needed it for lanterns on the trail ahead. They checked their weapons repeatedly, loaded and reloaded, making sure everything functioned perfectly. As the sun began its descent, painting Santiago Crossing in shades of amber and blood that seemed grimly appropriate, they moved into position. The abandoned building Vane had selected sat at the edge of town, a former storehouse now empty except for debris and rats. Elias poured lamp oil across the floor, while Vane arranged cloth strips to carry the flames. Vicente watched the street, his revolver ready in case someone interrupted. "Once we light this, there's no going back," Vane said quietly. "Everything that happens after is violence and consequences. You both understand that." "Light it," Vicente said. "Elias?" Elias thought about his wedding day, about Isabella's face as they dragged her away, about the past days of riding through hell, chasing men who saw her as merchandise. He thought about the man he'd been a week ago, soft, cautious, unwilling to embrace necessary brutality. That man was dead. Something harder had taken his place. "Light the fire," he said. Vane struck the match. The flame caught, spread across the oil, raced along the cloth strips with hungry eagerness. Within seconds, the entire building was involved, smoke pouring from windows and gaps in the walls. They walked away calmly, 3 men leaving a building that was rapidly becoming an inferno. Behind them, someone shouted an alarm. Then another. The cry of fire spread through Santiago Crossing like its own kind of flame, and chaos erupted exactly as Vane had predicted. People poured from buildings, some trying to organize bucket brigades, others just fleeing. The abandoned storehouse was fully involved now, flames reaching toward the sky, sparks carrying on the wind to threaten other structures. No one paid attention to 3 strangers moving purposefully through the confusion toward the Copper King's rear entrance. The back door was unlocked. Vane had made sure of that during their earlier reconnaissance, slipping the bolt while pretending to stumble drunk past the door. They entered a service corridor that smelled of old food and spilled alcohol, moved quickly to the rear staircase. Voices echoed from above. Wade's people organizing evacuation, moving valuable items, trying to maintain order while half the town burned outside. Vicente took position at the base of the stairs, his revolver held steady despite his shaking hands. "Go," he said simply. "I've got this." Vane and Elias climbed, moving as quietly as possible while urgency screamed at them to run. Second floor was mostly empty, guests having already evacuated. Third floor was different, voices arguing, someone insisting they had time to conclude business before evacuating, someone else insisting the fire would spread and trap them. Wade's private room was at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but Elias could hear voices inside, Calhoun's rough drawl, Wade's cultured tones, other men discussing prices and terms. "We don't have time for subtle," Vane whispered. "On 3, we kick the door and we start shooting. Target anyone with a gun first, grab Isabella and move. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Clear?" "Clear." 1. Vane drew his revolver. 2. Elias raised his rifle. 3. Vane's boot hit the door just below the lock, and the wood splintered inward. They burst into a room full of surprised faces, frozen in the moment between recognition and reaction. Elias saw it all in sharp detail. Wade behind his desk, immaculate even in crisis. Calhoun near the window with 2 of his remaining men. The 3 buyers in chairs arranged before the desk. And Isabella standing in the center of the room in her ruined wedding dress, her hands still bound, her face showing fresh bruises but her eyes burning with unbroken defiance. Then the moment broke and violence erupted. Vane fired first, his revolver barking twice in rapid succession. One of Calhoun's men went down clutching his throat, the other stumbled backward with a bullet in his shoulder. The buyers scrambled for cover, overturning chairs, one of them pulling a small pistol from his coat. Elias's rifle found Calhoun, the man who'd torn his world apart. Their eyes met across the chaos, and something like recognition passed between them. The acknowledgement that this moment had been inevitable from the second their paths crossed. Calhoun's hand moved toward his gun, fast for a man his age. But Elias was faster, driven by a week of rage compressed into a single pull of the trigger. The rifle kicked, the shot took Calhoun high in the chest, and the outlaw leader crashed backward through Wade's expensive window in an explosion of glass and wood. "Get her!" Vane shouted, firing at Wade, who'd produced a shotgun from beneath his desk. Elias dropped his rifle, drew his revolver, and ran toward Isabella. She was already moving toward him, her bound hands held out. Her face was a map of suffering, bruises, cuts, exhaustion carved into features he'd kissed just days ago. But her eyes held that same fire, that same refusal to break that had made him love her. "Elias!" she gasped as he reached her, his knife already cutting through the ropes at her wrists. "You came, I thought—" "Later," he said, the word coming out harsher than intended. "We have to move." Wade's shotgun roared, tearing chunks from the wall where Vane had been standing. The bounty hunter had rolled behind a heavy desk, returning fire methodically. One of the buyers made a run for the door, and Vane dropped him with a shot to the leg. "The window!" Vane called out. There's a balcony, go! Elias grabbed Isabella's hand and pulled her toward the shattered window where Calhoun had fallen. Outside, smoke from the fire was thickening, obscuring the street below. The balcony wrapped around the building, and Elias could see a support beam that might serve as a way down. Behind them, Wade was reloading his shotgun with practiced speed. "You're dead men," he said calmly, as if discussing weather. "Nobody robs me in my own establishment. Nobody." Vane's revolver clicked empty. He threw it at Wade's face, a desperate move, and charged while the man ducked. They collided hard, crashing into the desk in a tangle of violence. Elias fired twice at Wade, forcing the man to twist away from Vane. One shot missed, the other caught Wade's shoulder, spinning him. But the man was tough as aged leather and twice as mean. He brought the shotgun around one-handed, his face twisted in fury. The shotgun blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Vane jerked sideways, blood spraying from his ribs. He went down hard, his hand clutching the wound. "No!" Elias fired again, this time catching Wade in the throat. The saloon owner's eyes went wide with surprise. Then he collapsed backward, blood pumping between his fingers. Elias ran to Vane, who was struggling to sit up despite the grievous wound. Blood soaked through the bounty hunter's shirt. Too much blood. The kind of bleeding that meant internal damage beyond fixing. "Go!" Vane gasped. "Take her and go! I'm not leaving you!" "You don't have a choice." Vane's face was pale, his breathing labored. "Wound's fatal, we both know it. But I can still shoot, can still buy you time." He looked past Elias to where Isabella stood frozen in horror. "Get her out of here. That was the mission. Complete it." Gunfire erupted from the hallway. Vicente's revolver, firing steadily. The old man was holding the stairwell like he'd promised, but voices were gathering, more men coming, drawn by the sound of combat. "Vane, go!" The bounty hunter had retrieved his revolver, was reloading it with shaking hands. "I've been dying slowly for 12 years anyway. At least this way means something." He managed a grim smile. "Besides, I'm curious to see if I can take a few more of these bastards with me. Professional curiosity." Elias wanted to argue, wanted to insist they could carry him out, save him somehow. But Vane's eyes held a clarity that cut through sentiment. The man knew he was dying, had accepted it, and was offering them the only gift he had left, time purchased with his remaining moments. "Thank you," Elias said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Don't thank me. Just don't waste what I'm giving you." Vane's expression hardened. "And Elias? When you make it out, when you're safe somewhere with her, remember what you learned out here. Remember what you became. Because the world's full of men like Calhoun and Wade, and soft men don't survive long in it." Elias nodded, grabbed Isabella's hand, and ran for the window. Behind them, Vane began shooting at the doorway, his aim still true, despite the blood loss. Men screamed and fell back, surprised to face resistance from what should have been an already won fight. The balcony was chaos, smoke everywhere, people in the street below shouting about fire and murder. Elias found the support beam he'd spotted earlier, a solid piece of timber that angled down toward a lower roof. "Can you climb?" he asked Isabella. "I'll do whatever I have to." Her voice was steady despite everything. "Just get me away from here." They went down the beam together, Isabella moving with desperate determination despite her exhaustion. Behind and above them, gunfire continued. Vane holding the door, Vicente holding the stairs, two men buying time with their lives. They reached the lower roof just as a massive explosion shook the Copper King. Elias looked back to see the third floor engulfed in flames. Either Wade's lamp oil stores had ignited, or Vane had done something deliberately catastrophic in his final moments. The building was dying, and everyone still inside was dying with it. "We have to find my father," Isabella said urgently. "He came with you, didn't he?" "He's holding the back stairs. We go there now." They scrambled across rooftops, dropped to a side alley, and circled toward the Copper King's rear entrance. The whole town seemed to be in motion, people fighting the fire, others looting in the confusion, Wade's men trying to organize a response to multiple crises at once. The back door hung open, smoke pouring out. Inside, Vicente's revolver spoke one final time, then silence. Elias went in low and fast, his gun ready for anything. The stairwell was a charnel house. 5 bodies lay sprawled on the steps, men who'd tried to rush Vicente's position and paid the price. And at the base of the stairs, propped against the wall, Vicente Ruiz sat with his revolver in his lap and a spreading red stain across his chest. "Papa!" Isabella rushed past Elias, dropping to her knees beside her father. Vicente's eyes opened, focused on his daughter with visible effort. A smile crossed his weathered face, genuine despite the pain. "Mija," he whispered, "you're alive. You're free. Don't talk. We'll get you out, get you to a doctor. No doctors can fix this." Vicente coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Heart finally quit on me. Been waiting for this day since your mother passed." His hand found Isabella's, squeezed weakly. "I'm glad I got to see you one more time. Glad I didn't die wondering. Papa, please, listen to me." Vicente's voice gained strength through sheer willpower. "This boy, Elias, he rode through hell for you, became something harder than he was. You hold on to him, you hear me? Men like that, who'll walk into fire for you, they're rare. I will. I promise." Vicente's eyes found Elias. "You take care of her, you protect her. You be the man I saw you become out there in the desert." Another cough, weaker this time. "And you tell people what happened here. Tell them Vicente Ruiz died fighting men who trade in human flesh. Let that be my legacy." "I'll tell them," Elias promised. "Good." Vicente's breathing was shallow now, rapid. "Isabella, remember, your mother and I, we came to this land with nothing. We built something anyway. You can do the same. Don't let what happened here destroy you. Use it. Become stronger." "I love you, Papa." "I know, mija. I've always known." Vicente's eyes began to close. "Now go. Get far from here. Live the life we wanted for you." His hand went slack in Isabella's grip. The breathing stopped. Vicente Ruiz, who'd crossed a continent to build a better future for his family, died in a stairwell in the worst town on the frontier, surrounded by the bodies of men he'd killed protecting his daughter. Isabella made a sound like something breaking inside her, a sob that carried every ounce of grief and rage and exhaustion. Elias pulled her close, let her cry against his chest while the Copper King burned above them and chaos ruled the streets outside. They had maybe seconds before someone found them. The fire was spreading, Wade's men would be reorganizing, and two people covered in blood wouldn't pass unnoticed for long. "We have to go," Elias said gently. "I'm sorry, but we have to go now." Isabella nodded against his chest, pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When she looked up at him, her face had changed. Something had hardened there, some final piece of innocence burned away by the furnace of the past week. "Where?" she asked simply. "The stables. We get our horses, we ride hard, and we don't stop until we're out of this territory completely." They moved through smoke-filled corridors, emerged into an alley, and joined the chaos of evacuees fleeing the fire. No one challenged them. Everyone was too busy saving their own lives or property to care about two more desperate people. Jesus was leading horses from his stable when they arrived, the building threatened by the spreading flames. He saw them coming, recognition flickering across his face. "The bounty hunter's not with you," he observed. "He's dead. So is the old man." Elias pulled out the last of his money, pressed it into Jesus's hand. "We need our horses, supplies, and your silence about which direction we rode." Jesus looked at the money, looked at their faces, made his decision. "Your horses are ready. Take the road east, then cut south after 5 miles. There's a trail, not well marked, but it'll get you to territory where Santiago Crossing's law, such as it is, doesn't reach." He handed over the reins. "For what it's worth, I'm glad the girl's free. Wade was a monster, and the world's better without him." "Did Calhoun survive?" Isabella asked quietly. "The man who went through the window? He landed in the street, 3 stories down. He's dead, broken in half. So are most of his gang. They were in the building when it went up." Jesus stepped back. "Now ride before someone less sympathetic notices you." They mounted up, Isabella behind Elias on his horse, since there was no time to arrange separate mounts. As they rode out of Santiago Crossing, Elias looked back once to see the Copper King fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Vane was in there somewhere, dead or dying. Vicente lay in a stairwell, his life's blood soaking into floorboards. And Calhoun, the man who'd started it all, was broken meat in a street he'd terrorized. The price of Isabella's freedom had been paid in full, in blood and fire, and the deaths of better men than those who'd taken her. They rode hard for an hour before Elias felt safe enough to slow down. The night was cold, stars bright overhead, the frontier stretching endlessly in all directions. Behind them, Santiago Crossing burned like a beacon, visible for miles. Isabella's arms were tight around his waist, her face pressed against his back. He could feel her shaking, from cold, from fear, from the aftershocks of trauma that would probably never fully heal. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her voice hoarse. "I don't know yet. Somewhere far from here, somewhere we can start over." Elias paused. "If you want to. If you can still, after everything that happened—" "Stop," she interrupted. "Don't ask me if I still love you. Don't ask if this changed how I feel. You rode into hell for me, Elias Crowe. You became something you weren't, learned to kill, watched good men die, all to bring me back. How could I not love you more for that?" "You were supposed to be my wife," he said quietly. "We were supposed to have a simple life. Farm the land, raise children, grow old together in peace. Instead, I brought you this, violence and death and memories that'll haunt us forever. The simple life was never promised to people like us. We live on stolen land in disputed territory during violent times. Peace was always an illusion." She tightened her grip on him. "But we're alive, we're together, and we're free. That's more than I had this morning. That's more than I thought I'd ever have again." They rode on through the night, following Jesus's directions to the unmarked trail. By dawn, they were miles from Santiago Crossing, deep in territory that belonged to no one and everyone. They stopped at a stream to water the horses and rest. Isabella finally let herself really look at Elias in the growing light, taking in the changes a week had carved into him. He was leaner, harder, with new scars and older eyes. "Tell me what happened," she said. "All of it. What you went through to find me." So Elias told her about Vicente's grief and determination, about finding Vane and the bounty hunter's cold lessons in survival, about the ambush that failed and the desperate ride to Santiago Crossing, about learning to kill and discovering he had the capacity for violence he'd never suspected. Isabella listened without interrupting, her face grave. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "My father," she said finally, "he died well? He died protecting you. He held that stairwell against 5 armed men and didn't let a single one through." Elias met her eyes. "His last words were about you, about us. He wanted you to know he was proud, and he wanted you to live the life he and your mother dreamed for you." "And the bounty hunter, Vane? He gave us the time we needed to escape, bought it with his life, knowing he was dying anyway." Elias stared at the water flowing past. "He taught me everything in a week. How to track, how to shoot, how to survive. But the most important thing he taught me was that being soft gets you killed, that the world respects strength, not good intentions." "Is that what you believe now?" "I don't know what I believe anymore. A week ago, I thought I understood how the world worked. Now I've killed men, watched friends die, and learned that justice is just whatever the man with the biggest gun says it is." He looked at her. "I'm not the man you agreed to marry. That person died somewhere between Red Creek and here." Isabella reached out, took his face in her hands. Her palms were rough, marked with rope burns and evidence of her own ordeal. "Good," she said fiercely. "That man was too gentle for this world. He would have gotten us both killed eventually. This new man, the one who rode through hell and learned to fight, he's the one I need. He's the one who can protect us as we build whatever comes next." "You're not afraid of what I've become?" "I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of being taken again, of being helpless again, of watching good people die because bad people have more guns." She pulled him closer. "But afraid of you?" "No, you're the only thing in this world I'm not afraid of." They held each other as the sun rose fully, painting the frontier in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere behind them, Santiago Crossing still burned. Somewhere ahead lay territory unmarked on any map, places where 2 people could disappear and start fresh. The horses needed real rest, and so did they. Elias found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock, defensible and hidden from the trail. They made a small fire, ate what little food remained in their supplies, and finally let exhaustion claim them. Isabella slept fitfully, crying out occasionally in dreams that Elias could only imagine. Each time he held her closer, whispered words he hoped were comforting, and kept watch over the fragile peace they'd carved from violence. When she woke in the afternoon, her eyes were clear but marked with shadows that would probably never fully fade. "What did they do to you?" Elias asked quietly, finally voicing the question he'd been afraid to ask. Isabella was silent for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "Only if you need to tell me. Only if keeping it inside will poison you." She considered, then spoke carefully. "They hit me when I fought back. They said things, vile things, about what they'd do or what buyers would want. Calhoun's brother Marcus touched me in ways I won't describe. But they didn't—" She paused, gathering strength. "They kept me relatively intact for sale. Damaged goods fetch lower prices. So while they brutalized me in some ways, in others I was spared the worst." "I'm sorry," Elias said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm sorry I wasn't faster, wasn't smarter, couldn't stop it from happening at all. You came for me. Most men wouldn't have. Most would have grieved for a week, then found another bride and moved on with their lives." She looked at him steadily. "You became someone you weren't, learned to kill, walked into certain death. All for me. Don't apologize when you've already given me everything you had." They rested another day, regaining strength, letting the horses graze and recover. Elias taught Isabella to shoot his rifle properly, figuring she should know how to defend herself if they were separated again. She proved a quick study, her hands steady despite everything. "Where will we go?" she asked on the second night, staring into their small fire. "There's territory opening up further west. California, they say. Land grants for settlers, new towns being built, opportunities for people willing to work hard." Elias fed another stick to the flames. "We could go there, start completely fresh where nobody knows us, nobody cares about our past." "Running away?" Isabella observed. "Strategically relocating," Elias corrected with a faint smile. "Vane taught me that retreat is sometimes the smartest tactical decision. And if trouble follows us, if we build something new and violent men come to tear it down again, then I'll handle it differently than I did in Red Creek." Elias's expression hardened. "I won't wait for someone else to save us. Won't rely on law that doesn't exist or justice that never comes. I'll do what needs doing, however ugly that becomes." "You've changed," Isabella said softly. "We both have. Neither of us gets to be innocent anymore." She moved closer, rested her head on his shoulder. "Then we'll be something else instead. Something harder. Something that survives." They left at first light the next morning, heading west toward territory unmarked and unclaimed. Behind them lay Red Creek, Santiago Crossing, the graves of good men and bad alike. Ahead lay nothing but possibility and danger in equal measure. The frontier swallowed them like it had swallowed countless others before, two small figures against endless land carrying the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they'd become. 3 weeks later, they reached a settlement called New Providence, built around a freshwater spring in territory so new it barely had functioning law. Elias used the last of their money to file a claim on 40 acres of land that looked marginally less hostile than the surrounding desert. They built a small cabin together, working through the heat and occasional rain that transformed the desert into brief paradise. Isabella proved as tough as Elias had become, her hands developing new calluses, her body adapting to the brutal demands of frontier life. Other settlers arrived gradually, families fleeing various paths, individuals seeking fresh starts, the usual mixture of dreamers and desperate people that populated every new western town. Some tried to ask about Elias and Isabella's past. Most learned quickly that certain questions weren't welcome. Elias became known as someone you didn't provoke. He wore his gun belt even while farming, and the one time a group of drifters tried to intimidate him into selling his land cheap, they found themselves staring down a man who didn't blink, didn't back down, and made it clear he'd learned to kill and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. The drifters left without further incident. Isabella established herself as someone equally unbending. When a traveling merchant tried to cheat her on goods, she corrected his arithmetic at gunpoint and made him walk 3 miles for his trouble. The story spread, and people learned to deal fairly with the Crows or not deal with them at all. They married properly 6 months after arriving in New Providence, a simple ceremony with no church bells and no interruptions. The local minister, a former soldier who'd seen enough violence to respect those marked by it, kept the service short and didn't ask awkward questions about why the bride's dress was new, but the couple looked like they'd already been married in blood and fire. That night, in the cabin they'd built with their own hands on land they'd claimed through pure stubbornness, Elias and Isabella finally allowed themselves to believe they might actually survive, that the worst was behind them, that maybe, despite everything, they'd found the simple life they'd originally dreamed of. But neither of them lowered their guard. Neither put away their weapons or stopped watching the horizon for trouble that might come riding in. Because Vane's final lessons had sunk deep, the frontier respected strength, punished weakness, and offered no guarantees beyond another sunrise if you were smart and tough and willing to do what soft people couldn't. They'd survived by becoming hard. They'd stay alive by staying that way. And if some nights Elias woke screaming from dreams of Santiago Crossing burning, or if Isabella sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds, they held each other through the darkness and remembered that they'd walked through hell and emerged on the other side. Scarred, changed, but alive and together. In a land where only the ruthless endured, they'd proven they had whatever ruthlessness required. The peace lasted 8 months before the past came looking for them. Elias was working the north field when he saw the rider approaching, a lone figure moving deliberately across the flat expanse between their property and the main trail. Something about the way the man sat, his horse-triggered instincts Elias had hoped he wouldn't need anymore. He set down his tools, walked to the cabin, and retrieved his rifle without breaking stride. Isabella looked up from the vegetable garden she'd been nursing through the dry season, saw his face, and immediately went inside for her own weapon. By the time the rider reached their property line, both Elias and Isabella stood ready, presenting a united front that had turned away trouble before. But this rider didn't look like trouble. He was young, maybe 20, with the uncertain bearing of someone delivering a message he didn't fully understand. When he saw the rifles, he raised both hands carefully. "I'm not here to cause problems," he called out. "Just carrying a letter for Elias Crowe. Man in New Providence said I'd find him here." "Who's the letter from?" Elias asked, not lowering his weapon. "Don't know. I'm just paid to deliver. Man gave me $5 to write it out here and put it in your hands personal." The rider slowly reached into his saddlebag, pulled out an envelope. "Can I approach?" Elias nodded. The young man rode forward carefully, handed over the envelope, then retreated just as cautiously. "If there's a reply, I'm staying at the boarding house tonight." "There won't be," Elias said. The rider nodded and left, clearly relieved to be done with whatever errand had brought him to the Crowe property. Isabella joined Elias as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting cramped but precise. "Crowe, you don't know me, but I knew Silas Vane. He was my partner for 6 years before he took the Calhoun contract. When word reached me about what happened in Santiago Crossing, I did some investigating. Turns out there's a complication you should know about. Calhoun had a younger brother, not Marcus. He died in the fire. Another one, named Cole. He wasn't with the gang when they hit Red Creek because he was serving 6 months in a territorial jail for assault. He got released 4 months ago, and he's been asking questions ever since. Questions about who killed his brothers. Questions about a farmer and a Mexican girl who disappeared after Santiago Crossing burned. Questions that suggest he's putting together a picture that points directly at you. Vane would have wanted you warned. He invested too much in keeping you alive for you to die stupid because nobody told you trouble was coming. Watch your back. Cole Calhoun's got his brother's mean streak and nothing left to lose. Jackson Reeves." Elias read the letter twice, then handed it to Isabella. She read in silence, her expression hardening with each line. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. "No way to know. Could be weeks, could be days. Could be he never finds us at all." But Elias didn't believe that last part, and neither did Isabella. "We could run," she said. "Pack up, move deeper west, disappear again. We could. We'd lose everything we've built here, but we could." Elias looked at their cabin, at the fields he'd cleared and planted, at the life they'd carved from hostile land through sheer determination. "Or we could stay and deal with it." "Dealing with it means more killing." "Yeah, it does. Elias met her eyes. I'm not the man who left Red Creek anymore. I won't run from my own land because some outlaw wants revenge for brothers who got what they deserved. If Cole Calhoun comes here looking for a fight, he'll find one. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we prepare. We make this place defensible, and we decide now, together, how far we're willing to go. They spent the next 2 weeks transforming their property into something that could be defended. Elias reinforced the cabin's walls, cut firing ports in the shutters, stockpiled ammunition and supplies. Isabella practiced with both rifle and revolver until her accuracy matched Elias's, until she could reload in darkness by touch alone. Their nearest neighbors, a family named the Porters who'd settled 2 miles south, noticed the preparations and asked carefully if there was trouble brewing. Might be, Elias admitted. Man might be coming who blames me for something that happened before we arrived here. If he does come, I'd appreciate you keeping your family clear. This isn't your fight. Thomas Porter was a former soldier himself, marked by scars from battles he never discussed. He studied Elias with the assessing gaze of a man who recognized a fellow veteran of violence. You need help. You send up a signal. 3 rifle shots, evenly spaced. I'll come running with my sons. Porter paused. This man who might be coming? Is he justified? Did you do what he thinks you did? Elias considered lying, decided against it. His brothers kidnapped my wife on our wedding day. Killed 3 people in our town. I tracked them down and got her back. 2 good men died helping me do it. So, yeah, I'm responsible for his brothers being dead. But they earned what they got. Porter nodded slowly. Then you've got no debt to pay. And if this Cole Calhoun comes looking to collect one that doesn't exist, he's the one in the wrong. He offered his hand. 3 shots. I'll hear them. The waiting was harder than the preparation. Days stretched into weeks with no sign of trouble, and the constant vigilance began wearing on them both. Elias caught himself jumping at shadows, seeing threats in every distant rider. Isabella's sleep grew more fractured, her dreams populated by violence, both remembered and anticipated. Maybe he's not coming, she said one night, lying in darkness beside Elias. Maybe Jackson Reeves was wrong, or maybe Cole Calhoun decided revenge wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe, Elias agreed, though he didn't believe it any more than she did. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the letter arrived, sudden and vicious. Elias was in the barn feeding their horses when he heard Isabella scream, not fear, but warning. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the cabin just as gunfire erupted. 3 men on horseback were charging their property, firing wildly at the cabin where Isabella had taken cover. One rider broke off and turned toward Elias, a revolver already coming up. Elias dropped to one knee, brought his rifle up, and fired in one smooth motion that Vane would have approved of. The rider jerked backward in his saddle, his horse veering away as the man toppled to the ground. The other 2 riders wheeled at the sound, realizing their ambush had failed. Isabella's rifle spoke from the cabin, the shot punching through one man's shoulder and making him drop his reins. His horse bolted, carrying its wounded rider away from the fight. The 3rd rider, and Elias knew instantly this was Cole Calhoun from the pale eyes visible even at distance, pulled his horse around to face Elias directly. You killed my brothers, Cole shouted across the space between them. He was younger than the other Calhouns, maybe 30, with the same cold eyes but a wild edge that suggested less control. You burned them alive in Santiago Crossing. Your brothers were murderers and kidnappers, Elias called back, his rifle steady on Cole's center mass. They took what wasn't theirs and paid the price. You want to join them? Keep riding toward me. Otherwise, turn around and leave. They were family, blood. You don't get to just kill a man's family and walk away. I didn't walk away. I ran through hell to save my wife from what your family did to her. So if you want to talk about blood debts, you're starting from a position owing me. But Cole's face twisted with rage. His hand moved toward his gun. Elias fired first, but the shot went wide as his horse shifted. Cole drew and returned fire, 3 rapid shots that kicked up dirt near Elias's feet. Then Isabella's rifle cracked again from the cabin, and Cole's horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider hard. Cole rolled, came up with his revolver still in hand, and fired at the cabin. Wood splintered near the window where Isabella was positioned. Elias worked his rifle's bolt action, chambered another round, but Cole was already scrambling toward cover behind a water trough. More gunfire erupted. The wounded rider had gotten control of his horse and was circling back, laying down covering fire for Cole. 3 shots! Isabella screamed. Signal Porter! Elias fired 3 evenly spaced shots into the air, the signal they'd arranged. Then he ran in a crouch toward different cover, forcing Cole to divide his attention. The fight became a deadly chess game played across their property. Cole was pinned behind the water trough, but had a good firing position on both the cabin and Elias's position. The wounded rider was circling at range, taking pot shots that kept Isabella from advancing. This doesn't have to end with you dead, Elias called out. You can leave right now, live to see another day. You killed them all, Cole's voice cracked with emotion. Calhoun, Marcus, the whole gang. They were my family. All I had. You took everything from me. They took first. They came to my town, killed my neighbors, took my wife on our wedding day. What did you expect me to do? Just let them go? You should have died trying. That's what a man does. He dies before he lets someone take what's his. Cole fired twice more at the cabin. Instead, you came after them like some kind of demon, killed them all, burned down half of Santiago Crossing. They made their choices. I just showed them what those choices cost. The wounded rider made a mistake then, riding too close while trying to get an angle on Isabella. Her rifle barked once and the man went down hard, not moving after he hit the ground. Cole saw his last ally fall, and something broke in him. He stood up from behind the water trough, both guns drawn, firing at everything in a final desperate assault. Elias took aim carefully, tracking Cole's movement, and pulled the trigger. The shot took Cole high in the chest, spinning him. But the man stayed on his feet, still firing, still coming forward, driven by pure rage and grief. Isabella's rifle spoke again, then again. Cole stumbled, dropped one gun, but kept coming. Stay down, Elias shouted. Just stay down! But Cole Calhoun had nothing left to live for and no reason to stop. He raised his remaining gun toward the cabin, toward Isabella, determined to take something from the man who'd destroyed his family. Elias fired his last shot and Cole finally fell, the revolver tumbling from his hand. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Gun smoke drifted on the morning breeze. 3 bodies lay scattered across the Crowe property, blood soaking into soil that Elias had planned to plant with wheat. Thomas Porter and his 2 sons arrived 15 minutes later, rifles ready, and found Elias and Isabella sitting on their cabin steps, staring at the carnage. You hurt? Porter asked. No, Elias said quietly. We're not hurt. Porter surveyed the bodies, his expression grim. I recognize one of them. Rode through town 2 days ago asking about settlers named Crowe. Should have sent word, but I didn't think he'd move this fast. It's done now. Yeah, it's done, Porter gestured to his sons. We'll help you bury them. Can't leave bodies out in this heat. They dug graves on the far edge of the property, deep enough that coyotes wouldn't dig them up. Porter asked if there should be any words said, and Elias shook his head. They came here to kill us. They don't get prayers. The Porters left as the sun reached its peak, promising to spread word in New Providence that the Crows had been attacked and defended themselves. It would forestall questions, prevent a marshal from riding out to investigate. Alone again, Elias and Isabella stood looking at the fresh graves that marked the final end of the Calhoun gang's legacy. Is it over? Isabella asked. Really over? I don't know. Maybe Cole had cousins, uncles, other family who'll come looking. Elias's voice was flat, exhausted. Or maybe this is the end. Maybe we killed enough of them that the rest decided we're not worth the trouble. And if more come, then we'll handle it the same way we handled this. We'll fight, we'll survive, and we'll keep building our life here despite everyone who wants to tear it down. Isabella took his hand, her grip tight. I'm tired, Elias. Tired of fighting, tired of watching for threats, tired of burying people in our yard. I know, I am too. But we're not going to run, are we? No, we ran from Red Creek to Santiago Crossing, from Santiago Crossing to here. If we run again, we'll spend our whole lives running. Elias turned to face her. This is our land, our home. We've paid for it in blood, ours, theirs, good men who died helping us. We don't abandon that. We don't let them win by making us into permanent fugitives. Then we stay hard, stay ready, keep the guns loaded and the shutters reinforced. Until we can be soft again, however long that takes. They held each other as the sun crossed the sky. Two people marked by violence, but refusing to be defined by it, standing on land they'd claimed through pure stubborn will. The weeks that followed brought no new attacks. Word spread through the frontier grapevine about the three men who'd died trying to take revenge on the Crows, and the message was clear: leave these people alone or join the bodies in their yard. New Providence continued growing, adding new buildings and new families. A proper sheriff arrived, appointed by the territorial government, and immediately made the rounds to meet the established settlers. When he reached the Crow property, he studied the reinforced cabin and the distant graves with knowing eyes. "Heard you had some trouble," Sheriff Bennett said. He was a former Texas Ranger, lean and weathered, with the look of a man who'd seen enough violence to recognize it in others. "Three men attacked us," Elias confirmed. "We defended ourselves." "And they're buried out there?" "Yes." Bennett was quiet for a moment. "I could make this official. File reports, open an investigation, bring in witnesses." "You could, but I'm not going to, because I also heard about what happened in Red Creek and Santiago Crossing and what you went through to get your wife back." Bennett met Elias's eyes. "The Calhoun gang terrorized this territory for 2 years. They killed good people, destroyed families, and always stayed one step ahead of the law. If you're the man who finally ended them, then as far as I'm concerned, you did this territory a service." "I wasn't trying to serve anyone. I was just trying to get my wife back. Motivation doesn't matter much. Results do." Bennett tipped his hat to Isabella. "Ma'am, you folks have any more trouble, you send word to me in town. I'll handle it through proper channels if possible. But I understand sometimes trouble needs handling in ways that don't involve courts and paperwork." After Bennett left, Isabella turned to Elias with something like wonder in her expression. "Did that just happen? Did the sheriff just give us permission to handle our own justice?" "I think he gave us permission to survive by whatever means necessary, which in frontier law might be the same thing." Elias managed a tired smile. "Maybe we're not outlaws after all, just people doing what has to be done." Life settled into something approaching normal after that. The crops came in better than expected. Elias bought 2 more horses and started a breeding program. Isabella's vegetable garden expanded until she was selling produce in New Providence's growing market. They made friends cautiously, the Porters, a few other families who'd proven trustworthy, but they never fully lowered their guard, never put away their weapons, never forgot the lessons learned in blood. On the anniversary of their wedding day, the real one, not the interrupted ceremony in Red Creek, they rode out to a mesa overlooking their property and watched the sunset paint the frontier in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever regret it?" Isabella asked. "Becoming what you had to become to save me?" Elias considered the question carefully. A year ago, he would have said yes. The old Elias Crowe, the man who believed in hard work and fair dealing, would have been horrified by what he'd become. A man who could kill without hesitation, who'd burned down a town and felt no remorse, who saw violence as a tool rather than a tragedy. But that man was dead, and mourning him felt pointless. "No," he said finally. "I regret that the world forced the choice. But I don't regret the choice itself. You're here, alive, free. 2 good men died making that possible, and I carry their memory with honor. But you're here. That's what matters. Vane and my father, they'd be proud of what we built. Maybe. Vane would probably say we got soft again, that we're farming instead of staying sharp." Elias smiled. "But your father would see this land, this home, and recognize the dream he had for you. A life built on your own terms, not dictated by other people's violence." "We're not soft," Isabella said firmly. "We're just not actively fighting anymore. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Soft means unprepared. We're prepared. We're just choosing peace when it's offered." She leaned against him. "But if it's taken away again, we'll fight. We've proven we can." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, watching shadows stretch across land they'd claimed and defended. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound no longer triggered Elias's defensive instincts. He'd learned to distinguish between natural sounds and threats, between the frontier's normal dangers and the kind that came riding up on horses. "I want to tell you something," Isabella said quietly. "Something I've been keeping to myself because I wasn't sure how you'd react." Elias's heart clenched. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, I think." The words took a moment to register. When they did, a wave of emotion hit Elias so hard he had to close his eyes against it. Joy, terror, hope, fear, all tangled together. "Are you sure?" he managed. "As sure as I can be without a proper doctor, but yes, I'm sure." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach where no change was visible yet. "We're going to have a child, Elias. Bring a new life into this brutal world we're living in." He couldn't find words adequate to the moment. "That's everything. Or it's terrifying. I've spent the past week trying to decide which." Isabella's voice shook slightly. "What kind of world are we bringing a child into? One where outlaws attack your home, where your father dies in a stairwell, where you have to learn to kill before you're old enough to understand what killing means? Or a world where people fight for what matters, where mothers and fathers protect their children with everything they have, where hard people build something soft for the next generation to inherit?" Elias pulled her closer. "Our child won't grow up soft and naive like I was, but they won't grow up surrounded by violence either. We've made sure of that. We've ended the threats, claimed this land, built something defensible. Now we get to raise someone in the peace we created." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. Nothing about this life is simple. But it's possible. We've proven that already. We survived things that should have killed us, and we came out stronger." He kissed the top of her head. "We'll teach our child to be strong, but not cruel. Prepared, but not paranoid. We'll give them the skills to survive without forcing them to use those skills every day." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "A boy or a girl, do you think? Does it matter?" "Not really. Though if it's a boy, I want to name him after my father, Vicente. And if it's a girl," she paused, "I was thinking Sienna, similar to Silas, but softer. A way to honor the man who taught you how to survive without giving our daughter a bounty hunter's name." "Vicente or Sienna," Elias repeated, testing the names. "Either way, they'll know the story. When they're old enough, we'll tell them everything. About Red Creek, about the chase, about the people who died so they could exist. They'll understand the cost of the life they have. Will they thank us or resent us for the weight we're putting on them? I don't know. But they'll be alive to make that decision, and that's more than a lot of children born in this territory can say." They rode back to their cabin as full darkness fell, navigating by starlight and familiarity. Inside, Isabella lit lamps while Elias checked the locks and shutters, a ritual they performed every night, remnants of the vigilance that had kept them alive. That night, lying in darkness with Isabella's breathing steady beside him, Elias allowed himself to imagine a future that extended beyond simple survival, a child running through the fields they'd planted, Isabella teaching their daughter to cook or their son to speak Spanish, growing old together on land they'd claimed and defended, watching their grandchildren play in yards that had once been battlegrounds. It was a soft vision, vulnerable and gentle in ways that his life hadn't been for a long time. But it was also possible now, purchased through the violence he'd learned to embrace and the hardness he'd developed. The weeks turned to months. Isabella's pregnancy progressed despite the frontier's harsh conditions and the lack of proper medical care. She remained strong, working the garden until her growing belly made bending difficult, then directing Elias in the work instead. News came occasionally from the wider world. The territorial government was pushing for statehood. New railroads were being planned that would connect their isolated region to the rest of the nation. Change was coming, civilization slowly catching up to the wild spaces where people like Elias and Isabella had built their lives. "Do you think it'll be better?" Isabella asked one evening, watching the sunset from their porch. "When the railroads come, when there's real law everywhere, when this stops being frontier and becomes just normal settled land?" "Better for some, worse for others." Elias was cleaning his rifle, still a habit he couldn't break, even months without threats. "People like us, we thrived out here because we were willing to be hard when hardness was required. When it gets civilized, when violence becomes illegal instead of necessary, we'll have to adapt again. Back to soft? Back to appearing soft. The hardness stays inside, ready if needed. We just won't have to display it every day." 7 months into Isabella's pregnancy, Thomas Porter rode up to their cabin with urgent news. "There's a woman in New Providence asking questions about you," he said without preamble. Says she's writing a book about frontier justice, collecting stories about the Calhoun gang and everyone they hurt. Elias's hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt. What kind of questions? About what happened in Santiago Crossing, about the fire, the deaths, about a farmer and a Mexican woman who disappeared after. She's putting together a picture, Elias, and from what I heard, she's getting close to the truth. Is she law? Government? No, she's a writer from back east, but she's sharp, and she's persistent, and she's got money to pay people for information. Porter's expression was grave. If she publishes a book that identifies you as the ones who killed Wade and burned the Copper King, you could face charges, murder, arson, destruction of property. Wade was a criminal, and Santiago Crossing was a lawless town. You think Eastern judges will care? They'll see a man who took the law into his own hands, who killed a dozen people and destroyed valuable property. They'll make an example of you to show the frontier needs real law, not vigilante justice. Elias felt the familiar cold calculation settling over him, the mindset Vane had taught him. Assess the threat, consider the options, make the hard choice. Where's this writer staying? He asked. The boarding house. But Elias, Porter's voice carried warning. She's not an outlaw. She's just a woman doing research. You can't solve this one with violence. I know, but I can solve it with truth, or with lies, or with enough money to make the problem go away. Elias stood. Watch over Isabella while I'm gone. If I'm not back by morning, you get her somewhere safe and you don't look back. He rode into New Providence that evening, his mind working through scenarios. The town had grown considerably in the months since they'd settled nearby. Real stores now, a hotel, even a newspaper office. Progress marching forward, turning frontier into civilization, whether the frontier wanted it or not. The writer was easy to find, a woman in her 30s, well-dressed by Eastern standards, sitting in the boarding house's common room with notebooks spread before her and ink staining her fingers. Miss Thornton? Elias asked, using the name Porter had provided. She looked up, her eyes sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Yes. And you are? Someone who'd like to talk about your book, privately. She studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to place him, then nodded slowly. My room. 10 minutes. Don't bring weapons. Elias went outside, removed his gun belt, left it with his horse, and returned unarmed. Miss Thornton led him to a room where more notebooks covered every surface, filled with handwriting and sketches and what looked like witness statements. You're Elias Crowe, she said without preamble. The farmer from Red Creek who tracked the Calhoun gang to Santiago Crossing and destroyed them. That's one version of the story. Is there another? Elias sat without being invited, his posture relaxed but his mind calculating. There's the version where I'm a man who saved his wife from kidnappers and killers, where I went after criminals who'd murdered my neighbors and got justice when the law couldn't or wouldn't, and burned down half of Santiago Crossing in the process. Killed Augustus Wade, a businessman, a flesh trader and criminal who ran an illegal auction for human beings, and numerous others in what can only be described as a massacre. Self-defense. They tried to kill us. We fought back. Miss Thornton opened one of her notebooks, flipped through pages. I've interviewed 17 people about what happened that night. The stories vary, but certain facts remain consistent. A fire started at the edge of town, likely arson. During the confusion, armed men invaded Wade's private room, killed him and several others, and escaped with a woman who was being held for sale. Does that sound like self-defense to you? It sounds like you've already written your story and decided who the villains are. I'm trying to write the truth, which is more complicated than heroes and villains. She met his eyes. The Calhoun gang terrorized this territory for years. They needed to be stopped. But the way you stopped them, with fire and violence and no regard for law, that sets a dangerous precedent. What happens when the next man decides his cause justifies burning down a town? Where does frontier justice end and chaos begin? Where does law end and tyranny begin? Elias countered. You're from back east. You've got courts and marshals and prisons. Out here we have dust and distance and men who'll kill you before any law arrives to help. So we handle our own justice. We protect our own, and yes, sometimes that looks ugly by your civilized standards, but it keeps us alive. At what cost? You've become exactly what you were fighting against, men who use violence to get what they want. No, We use violence to protect what's ours. There's a difference. Miss Thornton was quiet for a moment, then set down her pen. I'm going to publish this book, Mr. Crowe. I've spent 6 months researching it, and the story of the Calhoun gang is important. It shows both the worst of frontier lawlessness and the complicated responses that lawlessness provokes. Your actions are part of that story. And if I ask you not to include me? To leave my name out of it? I can't do that. The truth matters more than individual comfort. Elias felt the familiar cold anger building, the impulse toward violence that had served him so well. He could solve this problem the way he'd solved others, permanently, brutally, with enough force to eliminate the threat. But Porter was right. Miss Thornton wasn't an outlaw. She was just a woman doing her job, trying to document a piece of history that included him whether he liked it or not. My wife is pregnant, he said quietly, 7 months along. We've built a life here, a good life, away from the violence that marked us. If you publish my name, if you identify me as the man who burned Santiago Crossing, we'll have bounty hunters and lawmen and every glory-seeking fool looking to make a name by bringing me in. Our child will grow up with that shadow over them. Something shifted in Miss Thornton's expression. Not pity exactly, but recognition of shared humanity. I'm sorry, she said, and sounded like she meant it. But I can't suppress truth to protect one family's comfort. That's not how journalism works. Then change how you tell it. Make me anonymous. Call me a local farmer or an unnamed settler. Tell the story without making me the centerpiece. The story doesn't work without specifics. Your journey, from peaceful farmer to killer, from victim to vigilante, that's the arc that makes this compelling. That's what readers will connect with. Elias stood, his mind racing through alternatives and finding none that didn't end in violence or failure. When does the book publish? 6 months? Maybe 8? I still have research to complete. Then I'm asking you, one human being to another, to think about what you're doing. You're not just writing history. You're shaping futures. Mine, my wife's, my unborn child's. And for what? So Eastern readers can feel sophisticated about understanding frontier justice? So people understand the cost of lawlessness. So they see what happens when civilization breaks down and individuals take justice into their own hands. Miss Thornton's voice hardened. You made choices, Mr. Crowe. Violent choices that had consequences. Now you have to live with those consequences, including being part of the historical record. Even if it destroys an innocent child's future? Your child will have a future. It might not be the comfortable anonymous one you wanted, but they'll survive. People always do. Elias left without another word. Knowing argument was useless. He rode back to their cabin through darkness, his mind wrestling with impossible choices. Isabella was waiting on the porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly. What happened? She's going to publish. Use my name, tell the whole story. In 6 months or less, everyone will know who we are and what we did. Can we stop her? Not without becoming exactly what she's accusing us of being, people who use violence to solve every problem. They sat together in the darkness, the weight of the future pressing down on them. We could run again, Isabella said finally. Change our names, head to California or Oregon, disappear before the book publishes. We could. Leave everything we've built, live under false names, always looking over our shoulders. Elias took her hand. Or we could stay. Face whatever comes. Defend our truth against her truth. What is our truth? That we survived. That we fought back against evil men and won. That we built something good from the ashes of something terrible. Elias looked at their cabin, their fields, the life they'd created. That we're not ashamed of what we had to become to survive. And if the law comes for us, then we'll face it, together. With the whole story. Not just the parts that make us look like criminals. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we stay. We prepare for whatever comes. And we raise our child to understand that sometimes survival requires hardness, but surviving doesn't make you a villain. The next months passed with the pregnancy progressing and the weight of Miss Thornton's book hanging over them like a sword. Elias made discreet inquiries through Sheriff Bennett about legal protections, about what charges might actually stick if someone tried to prosecute him for Santiago Crossing. Honestly, Bennett said, probably nothing. Santiago Crossing wasn't legally part of any jurisdiction. Wade wasn't a legitimate businessman, and any half-decent lawyer could argue you were rescuing your kidnapped wife from criminals. He paused. But that doesn't mean some ambitious prosecutor won't try. Frontier justice makes a lot of people uncomfortable, especially back east. They might use you as an example. So what do I do? You tell your story first. Before her book comes out, you get ahead of it. Write to newspapers, talk to territorial officials, make sure your version is out there competing with hers. Bennett's expression was serious. The man who controls the narrative controls how he's remembered. Elias took the advice. He spent his evenings writing out the full story, from the wedding day attack through the desperate chase, from Santiago Crossing's burning to the final confrontation with Cole Calhoun. He didn't soften the violence or hide his actions, but he provided context that Miss Thornton's research might miss. He sent copies to 3 territorial newspapers and 2 officials in the capital who were pushing for statehood. Then he waited. Isabella gave birth on a cold February morning, attended by a midwife from New Providence and Thomas Porter's wife who'd raised 6 children of her own. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Elias genuinely feared he'd lose her. But as dawn broke, a baby's cry filled their cabin, strong and furious and alive. "A girl," the midwife announced, placing the cleaned infant in Isabella's arms. "Healthy, good lungs, all her pieces in the right places." Elias looked at his daughter, tiny and perfect and impossibly fragile, and felt something break and remake itself inside him. All the violence, all the hardness, all the lessons in survival suddenly had a new purpose. Not just staying alive, but protecting this small life that depended entirely on them. "Sienna," Isabella said softly, looking up at Elias with exhausted joy. "Sienna Vane Crowe, so she'll always carry the name of the man who taught her father how to survive." They fell into the overwhelming chaos of new parenthood, sleepless nights, constant feeding, the discovery that a 7-pound human could completely dominate 2 adults' lives. But through it all, Elias felt something he hadn't experienced since before his wedding day in Red Creek. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope for the future. Miss Thornton's book published 4 months after Sienna's birth. It was titled Fire and Justice, The End of the Calhoun Gang, and it sold well in Eastern markets hungry for tales of frontier violence. But by the time it reached stores, Elias's version of events had already saturated the territorial newspapers. Interviews with him, with Sheriff Bennett, with witnesses from Red Creek who remembered the Calhoun gang's attack, all painting a picture of justified response to criminal violence. The competing narratives fought in the court of public opinion. Some readers sided with Miss Thornton, seeing Elias as a dangerous vigilante who'd stepped outside the law. Others embraced his version, seeing a man who'd done what needed doing when law failed. The territorial government, weighing public sentiment and their own desire to appear tough on crime while respecting frontier independence, issued a statement. "While we cannot condone individuals taking law into their own hands, we recognize that in extraordinary circumstances where legal authority is absent or inadequate, settlers must protect themselves and their families." The actions of Elias Crowe, while extreme, appear to have been in direct response to criminal violence against his person and property. No charges will be filed at this time. It was a political answer, satisfying no one completely but giving Elias the space to continue his life without legal threat. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Sienna grew from tiny infant to crawling baby to toddler, taking first steps. The farm prospered. New Providence incorporated as an official town, complete with schools and churches and all the trappings of civilization creeping into the frontier. Elias and Isabella aged into their roles, farmer and mother, respected members of a growing community. The guns stayed loaded but rarely left their cabinet. The hardness remained but retreated into background vigilance rather than active preparation for violence. On Sienna's 5th birthday, as they watched her play in the yard with Porter's grandchildren, Isabella turned to Elias with a question that had clearly been building. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. The intensity of that time, when everything was life or death, when you knew exactly who you were because survival depended on it. Elias considered carefully. Sometimes, there was a clarity to it, threat and response, problem and solution. No ambiguity about what needed doing. He watched Sienna laugh, completely unaware of the violence that had preceded her existence. "But I wouldn't trade this for that." The boring safety of farming, the mundane concerns of raising a child in peacetime, this is what we fought for, getting to be soft again because we made the world safe enough to allow it. We're not really soft, though, Isabella observed. We're just pretending to be, for her sake. Maybe. Or maybe we've earned the right to actually be soft, to let the hardness fade instead of maintaining it forever. Elias pulled Isabella closer. Vane told me that surviving required becoming something different, but he never said we had to stay that way forever. Maybe the real victory is getting to choose who we become after the fighting stops. Isabella leaned against him, watching their daughter play in the safety they'd created through violence and determination. Then I choose this. I choose soft. I choose peace. Even knowing trouble might come again? Even knowing that. Because if it does, we'll handle it. We've proven we can. But we don't have to live every day preparing for it. As the sun set over their land, still beautiful, still harsh, but unmistakably theirs, Elias felt the final pieces of his transformation settling into place. He'd been a soft farmer who became a hard killer who was now becoming something else entirely. A man who understood violence but didn't worship it, who'd walked through hell but didn't need to live there forever. The past would always be part of them. Vicente's sacrifice, Vane's lessons, the men they'd killed, and the fire they'd set. Sienna would learn that history when she was old enough, would understand the cost of the peace she grew up in. But she would also learn that her parents had chosen to stop fighting when the fighting was done, that they'd built something good after surviving something terrible, that hardness was a tool for when it was needed, not a permanent state of being. The frontier continued changing around them. Railroads arrived, bringing more settlers and more civilization. The territory achieved statehood. Laws strengthened and enforced consistently, reducing the need for individual justice. Elias and Isabella grew older, their hair graying, their bodies carrying the marks of hard living. But they grew together, watching their daughter become a young woman who inherited her mother's strength and her father's determination, but who never had to learn to kill to survive. On their 20th anniversary, they rode back to the mesa where they'd watched sunsets when Isabella was pregnant with Sienna. The view hadn't changed much. The land still stretched endlessly in all directions, still beautiful and harsh in equal measure. "Do you think we'd do it again?" Isabella asked. "Knowing everything it would cost, would you still track them to Santiago Crossing?" "Every time," Elias answered without hesitation. "You're here. Sienna exists. We built this life. Whatever the cost, it was worth paying. Even Vicente and Vane. They made their choices knowing the risks. They died doing something that mattered, protecting someone they cared about." Elias was quiet for a moment. "I carry them with me, their lessons, their sacrifice. But I don't think they'd want me mourning forever. They'd want me living the life they helped create." Isabella nodded slowly. "Then we've honored them. By surviving, by building, by raising our daughter in a world slightly better than the one we inherited." They rode back as darkness fell, the path home familiar now, the dangers that once filled every shadow reduced to manageable risks. Their cabin, expanded now, improved, but still recognizably the structure they'd built together, glowed with lamplight. Sienna was there, 17 years old and preparing for a teaching position in New Providence's new school. She looked up when they entered, her face so like her mother's but with Elias's eyes. "Did you have a good ride?" "We did," Isabella said. "Just remembering." "The old stories again?" "Always the old stories." Elias hung his gun belt by the door, still kept cleaned and maintained, still ready if needed, but days passing now without him wearing it. Sienna rolled her eyes with the affectionate exasperation of a child who'd heard her parents' histories too many times. "You two and your dramatic past. Some of us are trying to live in the present." "The present we built," Isabella reminded her gently. "Never forget that." "I won't, Mama. How could I? You two remind me at least weekly." But Sienna's tone was warm, understanding that the reminders came from love rather than vanity. That night, lying in the darkness, Elias listened to the familiar sounds of the frontier at peace, wind through the boards they'd placed, animals moving in the distance, Isabella's steady breathing beside him. All the sounds that had once triggered his defensive instincts now just marked the passage of another safe night. "We made it. he whispered to Isabella, though he wasn't sure if she was awake. We did, she whispered back, all the way from Red Creek to here, through fire and blood and impossible choices. We made it. Was it worth it? Look around tomorrow morning, at our daughter, our home, our life. Then tell me if it was worth it. Elias already knew the answer. Every scar, every nightmare, every hard lesson learned, all of it had purchased this moment, this peace, this future. The frontier that had tried so hard to break them had instead forged them into something stronger. And now they got to live in the world they'd fought to create. Not perfect, not without shadows, but theirs in a way it could never have been if they'd stayed soft. The story that began with a wedding interrupted by violence had traveled through hell and emerged on the other side. Not unchanged. That was impossible. But victorious in the only way that mattered. They'd survived. They'd built something good. And they'd proven that even in the harshest land, even when forced to become hard and violent, people could choose to return to softness when the time came. The past would always be part of them. Calhoun's cold eyes, Vicente falling in the stairwell, Vane buying them escape with his life, Santiago crossing burning like judgment itself. Those memories would never fully fade, but neither would this moment, safe in their home, their daughter sleeping nearby. Their land stretching peaceful under stars that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything they'd fought for, everything they'd killed for, everything they'd survived for. And in the morning, the sun would rise over the Crowe property once again, painting their hard-won peace in shades of gold, illuminating the life they'd built from violence and determination and love that refused to break. The frontier had tested them, absolutely. They had passed that test, and now they got to live with the consequences, all of them, good and bad, light and shadow. Together, always together. Until the land itself finally claimed them, as it claimed everyone eventually. But not today. Today they were alive, free, and home, and that was victory enough.